You good? All right, good afternoon. It's 5 p.m. Special City Council Workshop, Tuesday, May 9th. I'd like to call the meeting to order and acknowledge that the press and public were duly notified of the meeting in accordance with the Freedom of Information Act. Nicole, you mind doing roll call?
Sure. Councilmember Bogosian, Councilmember Hahn,
Here.
Councilmember Myers, Councilmember Ward,
Here.
Councilmember Streetman,
Here.
Councilmember Popson.
Nice to be here.
Very nice to have you. Councilmember Anderson,
Here.
Councilmember Pierce,
Here.
Mayor Pounds.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. First item, citizens' comments.
Mr. Klaus.
Al Klaus, 3 Grand Pavilion. This is our 13th presentation since 4/13/22 regarding noise ordinance and nuisance. This being the 6th time we're requesting and still waiting on written assurances regarding enforcement of 925 BC. Amplified music is unlawful and the core of this situation. Lack of enforcement during the last couple of years has evolved into a legal nuisance by the Sweetgrass Inn, section 925 I-12. Over 40 complaints resulted in 5 citations, all issued in November 4/22. Public Safety 5/2/23. Chief Cornett stated 4 complaints have been founded against Sweetgrass Inn year to date. However, this does not reconcile with the monthly report in your packet, which states 1 noise violation for April year to date. Chief Cornett further stated all complaints were from 1 person. Now, Chief Cornett, doing his job, would not state their name. However, I will tell you their initials are Al Klaus. On March the 3rd of 23, Debbie Stanley, Wild Dunes president, publicly acknowledged Wild Dunes does not have a fiduciary or moral obligation to aid us in our situation regarding noise abuse from the Sweetgrass Inn, thus carving us out of their empire, except dues, further solidifying their joined at the hip bond with the resort. Subsequently, Mr. Jim Anderson was elected Wild Dunes Community Association president, and Mrs. Hack was elected as a director. Clearly, Mrs. Anderson has a conflict of interest as Mr. Anderson's spouse. Mrs. Anderson, as you are aware, has been recently promoting Sweetgrass Inn to the city regarding sponsorship for an event. We respectfully request Mrs. Anderson immediately recuse herself from all further discussions and issues regarding the noise ordinance as it relates to the city, resort, and the complainants. It is very troubling to us, Mrs. Anderson and our leadership have not been proactive in this situation. The optics do not pass the smell test. Public Safety, April 13th, 22. Our very first meeting, not knowing the rules of engagement, after presenting our situation with documents, I asked Mrs. Anderson, what can you do for us? Mrs. Anderson stated, we will get back to you. Never heard back from Mrs. Anderson. Public Safety, November 29, 22. Mrs. Hack, again a Wild Dunes director, stated, there are, quote, there are some things outside of this ordinance that we need to do to help council address those items, and I can certainly give you a list of all the things we are doing as owners to mitigate. Mrs. Anderson stated, I think that would help. Where is the list? What is additionally interesting, Mayor Pounds lives approximately a 5-minute walk from our property. He has never once reached out to us to realize what we are really experiencing. Mayor Pounds, respectfully, we do not need a mayor who is hyped up on caffeine and jelly rolls. We need a mayor who's willing to get in our trenches and get their hands dirty. The current proposed changes in the noise ordinance, all carried by a 2-1 vote, extinguishes our rights to object to abuses by the Sweetgrass Inn, which are a nuisance and negatively impacts our livability. Said proposed noise ordinance is crafted in a pro-resort manner at the expense of the residents. We recommended a number of items to Public Safety to be included in the draft. All were rejected. Please do not pass said draft as currently written. Thank you.
Mr. Bosnick.
Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, and first, thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today. I do appreciate it. My name is Rich Bozick, and I live at 1544th Avenue. For those who don't really know where that is, it's between Palm Boulevard and Cedar Street. There's an item on the agenda that is before you. I just wanted to clarify a couple of issues and give you some history behind it so that you are fairly educated on the issue. Just to let you know, there's 11 lots out of 21, 11 properties out of 21 located between Cedar Street and Palm Boulevard, 43rd and 44th and 45th Avenues, so 11 out of 21, which are zoned as PDD. All of the other properties in that area are zoned as SR1. In fact, all of the other properties in the whole area outside the gates of Wild Dunes are zoned as SR1. The 11 properties are subject to the covenants of Wild Dunes, but we are not members of Wild Dunes. We're not part of the association. We don't pay any fees to the association, nothing. We don't have the opportunity to vote, nothing. There are covenants associated with the properties that are linked to Wild Dunes. And you may sit back and scratch your head and say, how could that possibly have been the case? Well, there's a very long story behind that, but I'll cut to the chase. There was a company, Seagrove, who was owned at that time by Henry Finch. And what he did is he assigned the covenants, very limited covenants, to the 11 properties. Basically, those covenants were very generic. They said, hey, we want to make sure that your lot is located, your property is located on this portion of the lot, and that the structure of the home meets the standards that they had at Wild Dunes at the time. But ultimately what happened was over the course of years, those restrictions, those covenants expanded to include all of the restrictions that are part of the ARC, the Architectural Review Committee of Wild Dunes. So here's the situation. There's 11 properties that are subject to the Architectural Review standards of Wild Dunes. We don't pay any money to Wild Dunes. We don't have any voting membership. But our neighboring properties are treated differently. They're zoned as SR1. The property owners got together and started scratching our head too, saying, well, it just doesn't make much sense for us. So what happened is we reached out to Wild Dunes and said, hey, look, guys, here we are in a situation. You don't enforce anything unless people complain to you. But what we want to do is sort of part ways with you, and with your approval, we'd like you to relinquish the authority that you have over us. Wild Dunes sent a response back on May 1st saying, yeah, we're okay with that, as long as you do a couple of things. They want us to modify the covenants. They want us to reach out to property owners in the neighboring area. We've retained counsel, we're working on that, and we'll be providing Wild Dunes what they need in order to move forward with our request. So here an issue is before you. We, these 11 property owners, have petitioned or had asked Wild Dunes to get out of the restrictions, assuming Wild Dunes, and we have every reason to believe they're going to move forward with that, assuming they say, okay, no more restrictions associated with the Architectural Review Committee for you guys, we don't want to be left in a situation where we don't have any restrictions on our property. Similar to what happened in the past, I think it was 52nd up to 56th Avenue, where the restrictions associated with Wild Dunes went away, and there were no restrictions on the property.
Mr. Bosnick, I need you to wrap up your comments,
And I
please.
will,
Yeah,
I
thank you.
will, I was there, thank you. And all we're trying to do is reach out to the city and make sure that the city puts in place restrictions for our properties so that they would coincide with our neighbors' properties. That's it for me.
Thank you.
Thanks.
That's all.
That it? Thank you. Thank you both. Our next item is special presentations. Our comprehensive drainage plan. Davis and Floyd reps are here. Douglas emailed this out this afternoon due to the size of the file. Douglas, you want to introduce this or
Yeah.
our guest?
Yes, I would just kind of give some background and say that a little over a year ago, I think, the city engaged Davis and Floyd to do a what we've called a drainage master plan for the island. And specifically in that scope, the city has asked Davis and Floyd to do a fairly deep dive for the 600 acres between 30th Avenue and Breach Inlet. That's been an area of the island that we really haven't done many projects recently. It hasn't really received a lot of attention. So we wanted them to really analyze what's in the ground there, what's necessary, what's needed, and plan some future projects. So they went a little deeper in that part of the island. And then as kind of a second part of their process, they looked at the entire, we think it's about 1,200 acres that is the entire system that the city oversees, and just look at things like how we are doing our routine maintenance, what our development standards are allowing, and are those contributing to problems down the road. So Davis and Floyd has been here a couple of times, just kind of keeping you all apprised of their progress. We thought it was good to have them back at this juncture there, and I'll let them give details as to how far through their scope they are, but they're pretty far down the road. So we thought it was just good to have them here, talk to you, and see if you had any questions. So we have Mike Horton and Austin Avent here, and with that, I would just turn it over to them.
Thank you very much. We certainly appreciate this opportunity. Mr. Mayor, members of council, we look forward to anytime we have an opportunity to engage with our clients in working through our scope. Thank you for the introductions. Four basic items I was looking to cover with you this evening. It'll be a short presentation, open to entertain questions throughout and at the end, of course. Phase 4 master plan, it was numbered Phase 4 following the Phase 3 area that had been studied in prior times. As Douglas had introduced, we've wrapped that up here about the end of the calendar year and produced a draft report, which I think y'all have a copy of. We're entertaining comments on that, and we also are continuing with the other three parts of our scope, which include the capital improvement plan, which is really an assimilation of works that have been done already, works that are still underway today by the city, and the product of others that have studied drainage before us, and trying to mold that all in together to a comprehensive plan with recommendations that reshuffle, if you will, or reprioritize those. So we'll go into a little more detail with that as time permits. But the other one, as again Douglas has introduced, is maintenance program. We reviewed what's taking place today from the stormwater maintenance activities and planning, making some recommendations towards that. And we're also looking over the development regulations and looking at it from a stormwater management lens and making some recommendations for the city to consider moving forward. Again, draft report is in your hand. As Douglas introduced here graphically, you see from basically 30th or 29th Avenue to Breach Inlet is the footprint. And we started out our work with an inventory, a comprehensive inventory of the stormwater assets or system features, the ditches, the pipes, the inlets, and the outfalls for these systems to drain into. It also included installation of 3 monitoring stations, which allowed us to collect here real time at the time throughout the study phase, but in particular very site, or in this case city specific drainage features and conditions and data such as rainfall, tidal stages, as well as groundwater levels, because one of the questions we had was what is the groundwater response during and following storm events. So you see a photo here where we've done a GPS inventory of the drainage assets. So now as a product of our services, you have a GIS-based layer system that can be used for ongoing maintenance activities, planning, and programming going forward. Just a couple of graphs showing some of the data that was collected and that the engineers had used in the study. That includes rainfall, tidal stages you see, and as well as groundwater, as I introduced earlier. This is a couple of snippets from within the draft report as well as the appendices that support it. Shown in the colors are basically the product of some of the modeling that's been done by our team. It shows depth of flooding and what areas are experiencing the flooding or inundation during particular storm events. And so basically you've got an existing condition as well as a proposed condition, existing on the left, proposed on the right. This allows us to graphically depict from the results of our conceptual design and modeling of those designs what difference you might expect to see during a particular storm event. So our team was tasked with looking at various rainfall events, design level events. We looked at and we had the benefit, I guess you could call it a benefit, of Hurricane Matthew and some of the tidal stages that had been recorded and some of the flooding that had been documented during that time. And that was really our task, was to look at what type of an impact our team could make as far as recommendations to alleviate some of those.
Can I ask one quick question before you go off that slide?
Yes.
Can you back that slide up a little bit? So when I look at all the blue, and I'm looking at your legend, and it says 0.1 feet, that's 2 inches, or an inch and 1.2 inches. So if I were to encompass all of the blue, am I talking about a couple of inches of accumulation in that area?
Yes, yes. Now, it's a tight scale, especially at this level, but you see greater than 3 is up above the red and the yellow. So yes, you could say it's at least 1/10 of a foot.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get order of magnitude
Yeah.
on the depth of
Very-
the accumulation. It seems like most of the blue is really just a couple of inches. What I'm inferring. Is that a correct assumption?
No, I think I'm afraid that cyan is inside the blue is
Yep.
up to a foot.
Okay.
So,
All right.
yeah, it's a very minor scale in there. We're looking at, we call it an appreciable amount of inundation or ponding. Where it occurs and how long it occurs ties into the definition or perception of flow.
And you're going to get to the time of dissolution on how long it took to that to go away, or, yeah?
Yes, it's not presented graphically, but we have that, and we entertain the timing of the flooding in our recommendations and
Great.
prioritizing improvements.
Okay.
Good
Thank you.
question. Yes, thank you. Some of the other improvements so the other one showed inlets where either more inlets or inlets where there are no inlets today, piping or larger piping or piping where there is no piping today. But also throughout there are some outfall improvements, and outfall improvements include not only tidal check valves or systems that would check off the tidal inundation, as well as installation of berms. And so as time permits towards maybe the end of the introduction today, that's a couple of the points I want to make are the conceptualized product of the berms and how those might be constructed and work through some questions maybe you might have of that. Also, we looked at infiltration, being the beach scene and some of the native soils that are in the area. That's obviously an attractive element, but also somewhat of a challenge because along with that you have normally naturally high groundwater tables as well. So some of our study has identified what limitation there might be or zone for infiltration. I know the DOT and others in the past have attempted to do infiltration where there's no real good outfall, so to speak, to go into, but there are some challenges associated with that with the groundwater levels. On the right-hand bottom side there is a quick snippet of a very large cost that we've come up with. This is for phase 4 only, but you can see nearing $46 million worth of improvements. That includes the top 2 ranked projects, Charleston Boulevard and Ocean Boulevard. They're a total of just over $7 million, and then there's a big group of outfall improvements. We've not parsed that out into particular smaller scale projects at this time. And then we had, following that, a number of other projects that we recommended for this phase 3 footprint. As Douglas had introduced it, as well as me, on our capital improvement plan exercise, we're now looking at assimilating the work that's been done by others to bring that to a larger and more comprehensive list. This is a quick just snippet of the top 2 Charleston Boulevard project. You can see again the difference in colors between pre and post project conditions. Same thing for Ocean Boulevard here. You see a rather drastic difference in the inundation areas between project states.
Just another quick observation, if I can, please. So you're using similar colors but different scales, it looks like, is that correct? So
Yes, that is
So this time,
that is
the upper limit is a half a foot instead of the 3 feet, looks like on some of these.
Well, and it's actually, if you look at it, it's different between existing and proposed too.
Okay.
That probably adds some difficult, but as far as the inundation, the bottom threshold is still the same at the 10th of a foot.
Thank you.
Yeah. Good point. Shortly after having released the draft, we were happy to participate along with others with the city, including Thomas and Hutton, who had done prior studies at the Beach Advocates Conference here hosted at Wild Dunes. So it was good to be able to represent some of the city's ongoing work at that conference. Phase 3 assimilation, this is a quick, very small scale graphic of the Phase 3 footprint outlined in red. But there were 10 projects identified in an interior, as well as, I think, 3 outfall projects that are underway.
Excuse me, can you give me the location for this on the island? What does it encompass?
Yes, the lower limits actually overlap a little bit with ours, and I think it's about 28th Avenue on the south side, and it goes up to the completion of Phase 2, which I think, I'm sorry, I don't have the avenue number by memory. It's actually off of the chart. The red line goes off the chart.
56, 55, somewhere up there.
Okay, so this is the other, okay, outside of Wild Dunes.
But basically, from the marina south is where the recommended improvements were for Phase 3. Answer the question?
Yeah.
Okay. So we've got 10 projects in addition to the 3 outfall projects. I think the 3 outfall projects, one's been complete, and I think 2 are still underway, maybe complete by now. And we're taking now the balance of those recommended projects and looking at how the city can rank those, because you've got the product now of 2 independent studies. And so we've been tasked with assimilating the results from this prior study and then intertwining it in amongst our ranking that we have released as part of Phase 4. Douglas had also introduced the maintenance review and recommendations. We've been working with the team to develop a maintenance schedule, recommended maintenance schedule. You can see a draft product over on the right-hand side without the detail being legible here, but looking at identifying monthly, quarterly, following significant storm events, and then with king tides, all of those triggering certain maintenance activities and inspection activities. Tracking, we felt like that may be one next step is, again, using the GIS database, for instance, of the stormwater inventory or assets, is to look towards what's been done, not only focusing on schedule for forward, but keeping track of the work that has been accomplished. Adopt a Drain is a generic name here used, but I know the city of Charleston and many other communities have been very successful in implementing an opportunity for the public to participate, to identify either single or groups of drainage features to some level where they take pride and responsibility over the outlook for those and upkeep of those to some extent. And then an online reporting system, we feel like is going to also be a recommendation of ours that allows the public to have an easy forum or easy opportunity to not only make a complaint, let's say, but also gather some very relevant and informative information on conditions that are experienced during and following significant flood events. Capturing photos is worth a lot to engineers and to your group in managing their maintenance activities and planning activities forward. Development of regulations. We've been looking through the current regulations, and we've been tasked with identifying what regulations outside of the ones that are geared toward for flood, National Flood Insurance Program participation, the flood ordinances, and also the stormwater ordinances through Charleston County that are tied to water quality and construction phase services or construction phase activities. We're looking at the others that might come about in the city's review process and finding opportunities that where not necessarily unintended consequences are, but opportunities that might not be taken on yet for improving long-term planning and long-term performance of your stormwater management system. So we've got those in the works and being drafted right now. And then best management practices, we feel like there can be some of those that could be incentivized maybe as an offset to some of the other regulations you've got. to take also advantage of any redevelopment opportunities for improving stormwater management holistically for the city.
And is this, are we 80% of the way through on this particular piece here, or what, where are we in this process?
Yes, at least 80. I feel like we've done this. I guess our approach now is to, much like we've done for Phase 4, is to release a draft of our conclusions and recommendations and entertain discussion further on that. But this workshop setting, as well as any other forums that we're open to participating to make sure we've taken the input that you'd like for us to consider in our work, considering these improvements.
And Douglas, is this one of the appendix that's not? in
No.
the- Okay,
No, we don't, no, it's not.
okay.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mike, a couple of things here. On Table 6, you had project rankings, estimated cost, and potential funding sources, and this ranking, is that ranked in order of importance in your mind, or is
It
it
is.
ranked in order of cost?
Not by cost, it's by
Okay.
importance.
Okay.
Yeah.
And under minor drainage improvements, and you also had some photos that were attached in here too that showed examples of visual existing conditions assessment with maintenance deficiencies. Are any of those under the purview of SCDOT, or are all these city maintenance type issues that we
I
found?
expect a lot of them are under DOT if they're in their right of way.
Uh-huh. And there was, I think you'd identified at least 37 of them
Right.
in this also. And the last question I had is you also, projects that are recommended to be implemented in a downstream to upstream approach for conveyance and upstream to downstream for storage and infiltration systems. Can you elaborate on that just a little bit?
Yeah, certainly. So one of the challenges we have is if it may be the area that's most prone to flooding and have the most damages, or sometimes higher up in a watershed or in a basin. And so a lot of times our focus, our desire is to go and fix that first with the first dollars that are available. And one of the challenges we have in the phasing strategy is that we can't make those improvements local only to pass the problem downstream. So when we say conveyance, that's movement of water. Many times our hands are bound by having to start with the downstream improvements and make preparations for that increased flow. Because a lot of times flooding is actually in the form of storage, naturally, in some cases for drainage. So to alleviate flooding upstream means we have to increase flows downstream, and we have to make improvements downstream before that can happen.
So if we fix something upstream, and it probably affects something downstream in a very negative way.
It could, yes, for conveyance, yes, sir.
Okay.
And so it's opposite for storage and infiltration. Storage and infiltration might afford us to maintain current sizes downstream. If we can get enough storage, we can do away with the need for that increased conveyance downstream.
And lastly, we saw a presentation at one of the beach advocates meeting about some of these infiltration systems, and they look like they have been very effective where they've been utilized. Is that correct?
Yes, we have the benefit now of newer technology and newer products that are available for underground storage. Used to, it was either like a French drain type of construction with a perforated pipe and stone or gravel. Nowadays, they've got some pretty high-tech, high-density polyethylene type structures that can make use of the limited space such that the island has here between the groundwater levels and the surface. So there's some innovation that's being developed, as well as innovative technology and products that together give us opportunities we didn't have just a decade ago.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Go ahead, Jim.
I hear you when you say about not working upstream first. I was hired on a project in city of Charlotte where they had started actually in the middle of the drainage area.
Oh, gosh.
And tore up everybody's yards, and nothing changed after the project was finished because downstream was still a bottleneck.
Still in there.
So I think we all understand that here. I had a couple of questions about what you're planning for here. Usually it's a 10-year or 100-year flood level or whatever that you're planning for. What is these improvements, what will they be for?
No, that's a very good question. Yeah, so our basis of design, or in this case, conceptual design, is not sure how it went off the presentation, but is the 10-year or 10% annual chance exceedance storm. That is a basis that many municipalities will adopt for the basis of design. It's one that the DOT would use for most of the road classifications in the city limits.
Okay.
One of the things we did, however, for Isle of Palms is to look at the tidal boundary conditions. That's a big influence in the performance of your drainage system, is not necessarily the conveyance or the amount or rate of rainfall, but is what is the tide doing during those times.
Yeah.
Rainfall, but is what is the tide doing during those times.
Yeah.
And so we've looked at it both a normal tide today, tidal stages today. We've also in the report addressed sea level rise to an extent, and we've for future conditions, as we call it, and we've also looked at Hurricane Matthew as a baseline to see what one of the initial steps we did after the inventory was to model drainage in the Isle of Palms, and we had the most, I guess, very recent at that time or relevant good documentation of not only the tidal or surge stages, but also photo documentation of conditions here with Matthew. And so we use that as really a calibration effort for our study to see that our models were emulating what you actually experienced just a short number of years ago with that condition. And so to answer your question, we've looked at several different approaches to it, but our recommendations and pipe sizing and ditch sizing and everything comes off of a 10-year design.
Okay, and that's the best we can do. I do believe that drainage is probably our number one priority right now on the island. So 10-year is not going to solve our problems. That means, like you said, we've got a 10% chance of having a 10-year flood every year, right?
No, it's not. It's 10% chance any given year.
Yeah, any given year.
That would be
those
exceeded, yeah.
chances are happening more and more often, so that a 10-year flood is no longer.
That's correct.
Yeah.
It is a moving target for us,
Yeah.
for real. The sea levels are rising and rainfall intensities are increasing. The total rainfall amounts are somewhat increasing as well. There's a good bit of uniform, not as much debate on climate change as a whole as we have for the fact that rainfall rates are increasing and sea levels are increasing.
Yeah.
And so it is somewhat of a moving target. As engineers, we stay out of the politics side of it. Typically, we look at it is happening. We need to plan for it. We need to make a basis of design for it.
Yeah.
Okay, and I'm really intrigued about the infiltration systems that you're proposing.
Mm-hmm.
But my concern is with the water table rising,
True.
will they continue to be effective in the future?
Right.
And also because we're flat, how do you get the water into
That's a very good point. So the berms and tidal checks at the outfalls will make a more significant lift towards building resiliency towards those sea level rises. You're right, the groundwater is going to respond in a similar fashion. Surface waters, I think, are more easily targeted and addressed. But you're right, from a holistic and regional perspective, the infiltration does come with limitations for time scale.
And this is a very thorough report that you presented so far, but I know when I was writing reports, I always prepared an executive summary, please.
Certainly, understood.
That
Note taken.
gets to the conclusions
Get to the chase.
and recommendation. Yes,
Yes.
please, for us, so that we will be able to pull this off the shelf in the future and have a working
I
document.
think he did on the $46 million page.
Yeah,
That's it, yeah.
Scott?
Yeah, that's pretty conclusive.
just a couple of other follow-ups to help me understand. So this is it's a heck of an investment, and it looks like a worthy one over time. But can you help me understand what is the objective when we're installing these drainage projects? And maybe they're different by project, but is it the difference of having the water dissipate within a day or hours, or what I'm trying to get a handle on? And one of the projects happens to be on the street I live in, and we experience a little bit of flooding, but and we've been here over 10 years. That the water accumulates within a day or so. 95% of the time, it's gone. So, but there's a $1.2 million price tag attached to that. So I'm wondering, I'm trying to get my head around with all this investment, what is the benefit prioritization, and should we really be focusing on those areas that were red and those projects? And it sounds like maybe you did that in your prioritization. But to really, we do have some massive hotspots on the island that do need the drainage, but then there are some others that they dissipate within a day or two.
No, it's a
And
very,
I'm kind of questioning the investment.
well, it's a good point to make, and for us to help give you the resources you need to make those decisions, because it is based on inundation that creates hardship for those, the traveling public, those that cannot drive through the flooded conditions. Most of your homes with flood ordinances and floodplain management, it's not your structures that are at the highest risk here. We're talking about property, use of property, cars, outbuildings and things like that. It is basically the impact to emergency services is another thing to consider. But a lot of times these larger events, the ones that you're looking for emergency services and things like that are well beyond our design. You're right. That needs to be factored into it. Duration, again, is not shown on the exhibits today, but it's something we have.
Okay, good.
And I think we can share that information, because I think you're right. That is one where you could look at, rather than red for depth of flooding, you could look at red for duration of flooding. And that might help look at it from a different lens and say, well, it's the duration that impacts our citizens the most, more so than the depth. Once you get below a certain threshold. Again, we showed just from a graphic standpoint, 1/10 of a foot is what indicated, ponding or flooding. But it might be another
That's a
threshold.
running puddle for me.
Yeah. So it could be 6 inches. That's where, a depth that most people would be comfortable driving through. That's curb deep. But those thresholds can be adopted fairly easily based on the results we have to help further guide.
Would it help us also maybe to evaluate the project next to each other if they were on the same scale, same color before and after? Would that-
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. And the last question, on your prioritization, you're looking at it from it looks like the mitigation viewpoint, and I'm wondering if, I don't know if the Planning Commission has seen this, but maybe they can give some prioritization on those other items and that you brought up as far as emergency access and road access and things of that nature. And I don't know, has this been presented to the Planning Commission? Okay.
No.
It is not, okay.
Good point.
Thank you.
Yes, so Douglas, what is next?
So I think out of this process, you all will start to see, I guess, first, some development standards that are going to come to you in way of an ordinance to consider in terms of changes you might make. And then I
On
think
this
that
piece here.
on this,
Yeah.
yes, on this piece, this will probably be the first thing that you will see. And then the next kind of deliverable will be in terms of how to prioritize and budget and start kind of picking off projects and choosing those projects. So that's, from the staff standpoint, kind of the next hurdle will be, once this comes in, to shuffle it and see how we can pay for it, how we can prioritize it, and start working through the list.
Okay.
Yeah, one last question. It looks like there's a lot of potential for funding sources here also outside of municipal funds.
That is correct, yes. That's one of the things we would hope that you could do with our deliverables, is to use that to make a competitive grant application for some of this funding. There's a lot coming out right now, has been, and so we've been working with several others to get our products out and about and competitive for grant opportunities, for sure.
Thanks.
Well, and to that point, I guess the top two projects of $7.5 million, we had applied for a grant and were denied. And I don't know if it was around, the experimental nature of the infiltration system or the permitting process. Who knows? We don't have that feedback yet. But I hear there is a lot of money flying right now.
One more question about funding. What is your experience in getting SCDOT to improve the drainage along their right-of-way?
It's a challenge. It is a
That's no
challenge.
help.
And so.
That's a professional
we're-
opinion, right?
Yeah, I'll say though, they have, first step is for them to work with us on the permitting, especially if there's an improvement that doesn't meet their design conditions. And so that's one that a lot of times, if you're making improvements within a right-of-way, they look to make them to a level that they would, to start out with. And so if it's an uplift that y'all would be doing, for instance, in funding work within their right-of-way, we would ask for their participation in working with things that may not necessarily meet their design conditions, but meet your objectives. We've also been successful in working with communities that start the work like you've done here. You're showing initiative, not giving them the problem, you're giving them now a plan that you look forward to moving with and looking for participation. And that has a little higher level of success in our opinion, working with them with not only a concept but an actual plan, or better yet, a design and a permitted project. And then we've seen them step in and match funds, for instance.
Yeah, that's what we're asking
Yes,
for.
and so every one of those comes with a little bit of eligibility issues, whether it's a part of the federal highway system or not, which, you know, you're probably not going to have here, I don't think. And then the others would be, what do they have available? And in partnership too, last thing we want to do is do a drainage improvement project, then they come in the next year to pave it, or we need to do the work the year after they pave it. So there's many opportunities, and there's some, I guess, capacity that they have with the right recipe for that
Yeah,
participation.
I would just add that we've had a lot of success with their maintenance operations. You know, they kind of were hit and miss in terms of what they would do. Their document has provided an inventory of existing conditions. It's shown, you know, this entire system is completely impassable because of sediment. So I think that the work product will be very useful in terms of directing their maintenance. We have never been, and I would also say that they've been very supportive of our grant applications. So efforts to get things paid for, they've been supportive of those efforts. But in terms of actually making improvements to the system, I mean, they just haven't gone to that effort. And I guess it's because, you know, when you look statewide at where these products or projects would stand, it would be very low on their priority list. So they have historically not, you know, funded large-scale drainage improvements, more maintenance and support to us doing it.
We might have an opportunity with the study that I think they're participating in on Palm Boulevard between 21st and 41st to add, looking at walkability and possibly a golf cart path and whatnot there. That's in an area that floods now. So there could be a possibility.
Wrap it all together?
Wrap it all together.
So Douglas, does this go to the planning commission
Yes. And
for a deeper
yes.
dive? I know staff as well, but
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah,
to
we
Scott's
will,
point.
you know, as we kind of wrap these end parts together, we will be analyzing it. We'll have the planning commission look at it. Environmental advisory committee's been interested to just see it from a standpoint of environmental concerns. So as it becomes complete, we will get the various commissions involved.
Thank you. What else, anything?
Thank you.
No, thank you.
Very
Thank you.
good, very good work. Thank you very much. Douglas, thank you for leading that one. Much more to come on that one, obviously. Next item is dashboard and departmental reports. All are included in your packet. Desiree, you want to touch on the dashboard?
Sure. Dashboard for April. First couple of things, revenues and expenses we're tracking as expected. We'll get a little bit more of an in-depth report during the financial reports later on the agenda. When looking at the police department charges and actions, we're tracking on most of these charges. We're tracking ahead of the same time for the past couple of years. Parking citations still a bit low. We are hoping that as we continue to add BSOs to our operations, that those efforts will improve. Municipal court docket, number of cases higher than the last couple of years. It just shows the level of activity that's generating by enforcement actions by our police department. Fire department calls. I know that at the last month there was a request made that we separated the automatic aid calls from total calls. That is shown in the fire department's monthly report. So if you look at the detail of that report, you can see it there. We have not made the change on the dashboard. We'll plan to do so for the next month. But just for your benefit, of those of those calls, about 27 calls were dispatch and cancel en route. So you kind of have an idea of how many they're included in the total, but they didn't really generate any action from the fire department outside of the island. So just take a look at the fire department report to get a little bit more of the detailed data on automatic aid.
So
Automatic aid.
what percentage, Desiree, because calls for service quadrupled this year? And so what percentage of those are automatic aid?
So for this month, 27 of those, so
And
this
what
is
percentage?
cumulative.
Yeah.
I would say a
15%.
third, yeah, 15-20%.
Okay, so we still have a huge jump in calls for service that are island related.
That's right, that's correct.
Weren't most of those canceled en route?
The majority, so 27 of 32 automatic aid calls were canceled en route. The other thing that I wanted to point out is under the building
Yeah.
department, you can see the short-term rental license issues that we track every year. As you all know, the deadline for new applications for the new license year was end of April. So far, the department has processed 892 licenses, new licenses. I think it'll take us about maybe another month to go through all of the applications and get a clear picture of total number of licenses compared to last year.
I have a question about that.
Sure.
This time last year, how many licenses had we processed? I mean, I'm trying to ask is, if we could talk about a trend, if it was possible, is it going down or is it going up? Or is it staying the same?
I don't know how many licenses we processed within the week last year so that we can compare apples to apples. Do you?
Yeah, I would say the 892 is more, today, it's more a function of how quickly the staff is able to process them, because there's still a stack. There's probably another 200-300 to be entered. So if there was a difference between 1 year ago today, it would really just be between how quickly they were able to enter those applications.
Okay.
I think we'd have to wait, as Desiree said, another month or so to see if there's any recognizable trend. One other thing I would point out is the 1791 is now, I mean, that pretty well closes last year. So that number kind of ticks up, as you know, every month until the ultimate number, which is going to be about 1791. And I would just add that we did implement the Rentalscape, the new software. That generated about 40 properties that were unlicensed. We're now going, a lot of those 40 were condominiums that got misidentified, so we don't know, and we're in the process of sorting through those 40 now. Those 40 will be tacked on to the 1791. So that's still a little bit fluid. It's gonna move a little bit, but probably 20, 30, and then all of the rest will be adding on to the 892 number.
So roughly right now, we're about through April, we're about 900 behind the 1791.
Yes.
But I think apples to apples, we won't know the apple to the 1791 until April 30th of '24.
That's exactly right.
Correct.
It will tick up every month. You know, as you all watched last year, you saw each month it's a few more. The bulk come in this first few months, but it will continue to tick up through the year. So
All
it
the
won't really know.
1791 are good for this coming season, is what you're basically.
No.
Say that the
They're
1791
not-
have expired,
Expired.
and they're now done. So really, it's just the 892, and then those that are in the pile to be processed across the hall that are good for this year going forward.
But do you see, like, you've been doing this a long time, like daily traffic? Is it, or do you have any people say, well, I'm not going to renew?
It's very tough for me. So I can tell you that we have 3 people doing it. It's very tough for me to get a sense of numerically how many are in that stack. So I would be completely guessing to say that the trend was any different than years prior.
But you're guessing by the end of the month, we'll have a good handle on
Yes, I think we'll be
the
through
bulk
the
of the
stack.
renewals.
Yes.
Yeah.
By the end of May.
End of May.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
I have a question about the new home permits. 5 seems like it's rather low. Is this fit the pattern of the past where most of your permitting is done in the summertime, or is this really?
No, I think it is
indication?
down. We've been kind of talking about that internally, that we were doing kind of one a week-ish in terms of plan reviews and permitting, and it's been slower.
Okay.
And there's not really a rhyme or reason. There's not kind of this period that we're inundated and then droughts of review. It's typically pretty steady. So we do think that it's slowing down a little bit.
Okay, thank you.
What's your initial read on Rentalscape? Any initial impressions?
So I think it's very good in terms of the background that it's providing. We're seeing kind of rental activity better than we did with Granicus. I think we thought that it might identify significantly different pool, more, that really hasn't planned out. I think it basically is pretty much identifying the same pool that Granicus was identifying. It's just giving us more detail on the back end, which should be helpful, and our
Better
staff is
analytics,
doing that.
yeah.
Yes, our staff is kind of verifying reported income is within the ballpark of Rentalscape's income. So we think it's an improvement from that standpoint, but in terms of sheer numbers, we don't think it's going to make much of a difference, if any.
All right, Desiree, what else?
Just wanted to highlight personnel vacancies. Still interviewing for finance directors. Have the code enforcement position open, also recruiting for that. 1 police officer in the police department, 1 firefighter, and it's not shown here, but we do have 1 CDL driver vacancy in the public works department. Recreation looking for a parks and ground maintenance manager, and 4 part-time folks for summer camp. 13 BSOs, so far we have 6 working currently, ongoing applications that we're reviewing, and hopefully our numbers will look better than last year. And as y'all recall, last month, the direction given was for us to increase our budget and increase the number of BSOs that we hire so that we can have more dedicated resources for parking management and the beach. So we're evaluating an incentive program for BSOs, for these seasonal employees, where we give essentially a bonus for those folks that work through at least mid-August, and a higher incentive for those that work through the end of September. So we're hoping that will create an incentive for seasonal workers to come and join us for the summer. Upcoming community events, there's a lot going on. I hope everybody's keeping track of the calendar on the website and the recreation department's page, but just wanted to highlight that the upcoming ones. We're doing a hurricane preparedness expo. We haven't done one in a couple of years, and we thought it would be important to educate our community. We have a lot of new folks that have moved to the island recently from up north. They don't know what hurricanes are, so we want to make sure that they're prepared ahead of the hurricane season. So that's coming up next week in the afternoon, and I believe all vendor tables have been are fully booked. So we anticipate a pretty big event there. The bike rodeo, that's an event that the recreation department's putting together with the help of our public safety folks and also the Lens organization, and essentially just teaching kids about bike safety, checking their bikes, giving just some very high level maintenance for the bicycles. We think it'll be an exciting time. So if you have a bike, Young and old are invited. Community overdose prevention and Narcan training. So this was actually something that was requested by some of our businesses here in Front Beach, that they wanted to be able to know how to administer Narcan. And our fire department have put together an event that's open to the public end of May 24th. And then the sand sculpting contest, we're having it first weekend of June. Are there any questions about the dashboard? We've also included all of the departmental reports. If anybody has any specific questions, happy to address those or have the department heads answer.
Questions on departmental reports or dashboard? Davis and Floyd folks, do not think you have to sit here for this riveting conversation. You do what you need to do. Desiree, thank you and
You're
staff for
welcome.
putting all that together. Next item, strategic plan, policy initiatives and priorities. A, livability, discussion of changes to the noise ordinance. You've got an updated draft in your packet. Desiree, you want to?
Sure. So this is the noise ordinance that we've been working on for several months now with the Public Safety Committee. The version that you have in front of you that's included in the packet was a version as was revised and amended by the committee at their meeting earlier this month. I can certainly go through each section. I think there's a lot of conversation that should happen, a lot of feedback that I'm hoping to get from the entire body. The committee made a recommendation to present this and recommend adoption. So this would be something that the workshop could recommend to bring up at the next council meeting for action if you all are ready for that. Or we can certainly receive more feedback based on what you have in front of you, and we can make some adjustments as necessary. Essentially, the ordinance that you have in front of you attempts at eliminating the subjectivity piece of what is considered excessive noise, and establishes some clear standards using decibel limits for the allowable noise, essentially, in different areas of the island. So this noise ordinance creates a different expectation, essentially, for rental and residential properties, another one for commercial properties, and then a separate one for GC2 zoning district, which is the area that encompasses 10th to 14th on Ocean Boulevard. We've talked about, what the decibel thresholds are. We had a lot of discussion with the Public Safety Committee about those numbers, where they should be. Also discussed potential changes to the daytime hours and the nighttime hours. There were no changes made at the committee level, but that's certainly something that the entire council can discuss and make changes to. So essentially, I can go through each section like we did at public safety. I'm not sure if I need to do that. It certainly can. But this is the latest version, and I think it attempts to create an objective standard for noise island-wide.
Yeah, let's assume people have done their homework at this point and read it. Was there a conversation, maybe looking at the committee, for a trial period, kind of like what Mount Pleasant did? Go ahead, Blair.
Mr. Mayor, from my perspective, the committee has struggled with this for some time, and we've struggled with decibel levels, we've struggled with time limits. This is not perfect, and it will never be perfect. From my perspective, we need to do something because we have a noise situation and put it in place, and then we're going to have to revisit it in the fall. We don't know what the right decibel levels are, and I don't think we will ever know until something is in place and tried. And that's the only way I think that we're going to be able to do this.
So there was not sunset on this particular ordinance, it's just
No.
No.
the times, the ordinance, or decibel levels. Got it, thank you.
I think that, to me, is, I didn't vote for it. It passed 2-1. But I had a lot of problems with it, especially with the decibel levels, especially at the Sweetgrass Inn. And I think my main focus was enforcement. And I had some questions about the 5 strikes and rule, and I was wondering if I could ask for the police chief to come forward and answer a couple of questions, if you wouldn't mind. Specifically, sir, the Sweetgrass Inn, I'm getting conflicting reports. If there's this language that it's a reportable event and you get up to 5, get 5 strikes. And where is that particular property at this point? Have they had any reportable violations? If so, how many?
So the one thing we've discussed and we found with our current noise ordinance pertaining to business license revocation or suspension is that it's conflicting within itself. It's got one that says that if there is a specific type of reportable offense or a tremendous event, and then it also has a section for 5 founded complaints within the police department. It has had 4 founded complaints at this time, and that's, we've discussed with the city administrator and the assistant city administrator about that already.
And I can expand on that a little bit. So the noise ordinance, as it's written today, under the section under violations, it establishes that a business that engages in repeated violations may be subject to a suspension or revocation of a business license. That same section under the noise ordinance, which is in Chapter 8, references Chapter 7, which is related to business licenses. And Section 7.5.15 talks about the process for the suspension and revocation of a business license. There, in that section in 2021, the city amended that section to include the requirement or the threshold of the 5 founded complaints. For a licensee, 5 founded complaints may result in the revocation of a business license. It is very well documented that the intent at that time was for that to apply to short-term rental licenses. So this came as a recommendation from the Planning Commission that before making this change, the threshold was a violation, so it had to be adjudicated by the court. That became a very high threshold, and the recommendation was made. It should be founded complaints, whether it generated a citation, whether it generated a guilty verdict essentially by the court or not, that it should count. It's not very clear when you look at the ordinance that just applies to short-term rentals, but that was certainly the intent in 2021. For the noise ordinance, when you look at that section, it talks about repeated violations. So violations are convictions. A ticket has been issued, it was either paid or was contested at court, and then the court decided whether or not the citation was valid or not. That is our recommendation and the city attorney's recommendation for the language for noise violations. So it would be different than short-term rentals. So right now, the Sweetgrass Inn has 4 founded complaints. However, our interpretation of the code would not require or would not trigger at the 5th founded complaint for the business license revocation process to begin until those complaints result in actual violations and convictions by the court.
So can I ask a question? So these violations, we're not ticketing. Am I hearing basically they're founded violations, but we're not ticketing, so they don't count?
The 4 that
Founded
are
complaints, but we're not ticketing, so they don't count.
correct.
So then where's the enforcement side of things, besides a founded complaint?
Well, I think we have to keep in mind that enforcement doesn't always result in a ticket.
But no, what I'm hearing is, how many tickets have we written?
Let Desiree finish her comment.
I just asked a question, if you don't
And
mind.
she's trying to
please.
answer
Yeah.
it.
I'm asking how many tickets have we written?
And she's trying to answer the question.
So, calendar year, we haven't written any citations to the hotel specifically. Last year, they did receive about 3 or 4, if I recall correctly. 4 or 5 actual citations.
Correct.
Year-to-date, only warnings have been issued to the resort.
How many tickets have we written elsewhere outside of the resort?
For noise.
I don't think according to the
This year,
report.
one for a loud noise.
Okay, and we're couching this as enforcement. I guess what I'm looking at is if I'm getting warnings all the time, and there's no consequence other than stop, then I guess, then I'm wondering, how are we defining enforcement?
When you look at enforcement for short-term rental, realize that every time we go, it's a different party that is there. And so if I go today, it's going to be one renter that's there. And I go to the same location next week, it's a different renter. If I go that first time and I say, hey, there's a noise ordinance violation here, and they turn everything down and they go inside, I have accomplished enforcement. We've got compliance with the law. If I come next week, it's a whole nother family. We've already notified the short-term rental, but the short-term rental itself is not the one committing the noise violation.
They're not getting the ticket.
Correct. We
Right.
can't write them a ticket. They didn't break the law.
Right.
So I think to the point of the citations, and, we've had this conversation internally, I think we could do a better job at issuing citations when complaints are deemed to be founded. I don't agree in removing the judgment of the officer that is responding to an incident. I think having that discretion and be able to achieve enforcement and achieve compliance with the law. Sometimes that happens by them just showing up. Sometimes that happens by having a conversation. Hey, you got to turn the volume down. And oftentimes, I think that is what happens with the resort when the police department responds. But they do respond to every complaint and every call made to the police department. But I think keeping in mind, enforcement doesn't always necessarily mean tickets written. It's have we obtained compliance, essentially. Not to say that I think there's a
I'm
room
looking
for
at it if I-
improvement here.
Right. And I'm just saying, hey, if I speed or if I am intoxicated, I'm going to get a ticket. I'm going to get pulled over. It just seems like on our sound violations, we've decided to take a warning for pretty much every violation. And if that's the policy that we have today, maybe we should just consider that policy, or maybe we're not taking that policy.
There's no policy. We don't tell the officers you can only write warnings, or you have to write citations. That's up to the officer responding and their judgment of the situation and how compliance has been obtained.
And I would also state your example of speeding. I promise you, there are just as many warnings for traffic violations, probably more of those issued than there are traffic citations. This is consistent policing across the nation.
And I'm not suggesting for every violation to write a ticket. I'm just saying that, it sounds like we're not writing hardly any tickets. So there's just, it's where does the line get drawn? That's all.
I would also just add that the planning commission's that is kind of what drove the planning commission's recommendation to count founded complaints. And I don't think that's, under debate. So in terms of short-term rentals, I think the staff's directive is to go on founded complaints and not citations because of these issues. So this kind of anomaly, for lack of a better term, when it's noise from something other than a short-term rental, I think that has created the scenario we're in today. But for short-term rentals, the staff's directive is to look at founded complaints, and 5 being the magic number.
I would say too that the reason we're having the discussion about the noise ordinance is if it's written differently and there's less subjectiveness to it, it's easier for me to hold somebody accountable. I can't tell an officer what they felt or heard because that's subjective to them. But if I could see on a decibel reader on their body camera that it was an excess, I could say, hey, you should have written a ticket there.
And by the way, I'm all for adding a decibel levels within the current sound, noise ordinance.
Yes,
So
sir.
I'm not, I think you have to have both the quantifiable, but also, I think we also have to have the escape hatch where if it's annoying or disturbing to a resident, they should be able to call as well.
Couple other questions. Jimmy, that was your question. Are you
I'd like to have others speak.
Rusty then Kevin?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's why we need quantifiable decibel levels here, I think. I mean, the council member Hahn's comments earlier, we don't have anything here that we can quantify that would give the police department and code enforcement to work with you look at a speed limit's posted. You know when, through the radar gun or whatever, you know when someone's broken the speed limit, and whether it's a warning or whether it's a ticket and a fine is up to officer discretion, I'm sure. But, the fact is, with our livability statistics, when you look at April, we had quite a number of noise-related complaints. We had no citations that were issued that I can see here. I may be missing something. And I think the big gap that we have is that we've done a lot of talking about noise ordinances and about decibel levels, but I think we've just got to get to the point where we put something in place that's reasonable, we think, and then leave the option open to being able to go forward and make the adjustments as we feel like it's needed, to sort of smooth out the wrinkles, so to speak. So, and I think it's the way our current noise ordinance is, it's totally subjective. It leaves too much to an officer's discretion, and quite honestly, I think the way we have it in place right now is almost completely unenforceable to some extent.
Okay.
So Desiree, I just want to get it straight in my mind. So you said last year the Sweetgrass had 3 citations?
I believe it's more than that. I don't,
It was 4 or 5.
5.
So did that trigger anything with their license since they hit the,
No.
I thought 5 was the sort of the
So,
threshold.
so 5 is the threshold for short-term rental.
Gotcha.
So 5 founded complaints. For the noise noise violations to trigger the suspension or revocation of a business license, the ordinance just says repeated. So there's no magic number. Could the city maybe last year, could that have triggered and we could have begun the process to revoke their license? Sure, I think an argument could be made that 5 was repeated. Right now, the way that this is drafted, it says 5 violations, so 5 convictions by, citations that have been adjudicated by the court would trigger that process that's spelled out in section 7-115.
So do they reset every year? Do we
it-
go back to 0 every year?
Just like
Yes.
the short-term rentals does as well.
Okay.
I also think that of those 4 or 5, a large number of them were at one event, or multiples were at one
I
event.
believe they
Yes.
were all at one event.
Yeah, so it was kind of one night that generated, and, I don't know that we would ever consider revoking a license for one event.
But they did not, they did not remedy the problem when asked to.
Correct, and that's where the ticket comes in. Most of the time when we show up, they are either in the process of already correcting it, or our presence corrects it, and we don't issue tickets for those. And I'm not saying we're perfect by the way we're doing it by any means. I think we could write some more tickets.
Well, that's the
Sure.
point. I mean,
But that night, they certainly did not correct the issue, and even after the first few tickets, they still had not corrected it.
So Chief, what's your view of this current ordinance? I mean, it obviously has the time of day and the decibel level, which would help your officers, I'm assuming. Do you have other feedback on any other pieces?
The big thing for us is having something that when we go to court, I'm not telling the judge that I felt like it was too loud. I'm saying it was too loud based on this decibel reading. It's easy to defend that in court, the subjectiveness, because any ticket we write, they can request a jury trial, and they can put us up there and ask us questions about it. And if we don't have any evidence other than I felt, then, that's not gonna work. Even with a speeding case, we have to be able to present that we had a radar, that we were certified with radar, that our radar was calibrated. So we have to present evidence even for speeding. Same thing with this loud noise. This will give us the ability to have evidence to put forward to be able to prosecute. That's one of my biggest hangups with it, is it's hard to prosecute what we have now. Not that we couldn't try it, and we have in the past, but I think this would make it much easier based on what's written in here, and it's clear. There's no gray area, other than I think we talked about D. Paragraph D does have some gray area in it that kind of opens us up to that. I think when we eliminated, the Public Safety Committee recommended eliminating 2 definitions. one of these definitions that was eliminated, the excessive noise, I believe it was.
Yes, excessive noise and plainly audible were removed from the definition, and I think to that effect, subsection D refers to the excessive noise prohibited, and if the goal is to eliminate any gray area and sort of subjective measures to determine whether a noise is prohibited or not, the recommendation is being made that that section in its entirety be removed. Therefore, the threshold would be the guiding principle. The decibel threshold would be the guiding principle to determine whether it's a violation. And I think we've talked about this at length at public safety. There are noises that will be annoying to some that may not meet that decibel threshold. So I think we have to kind of go in eyes wide open. There's been some question and concerns about bass sounds being, kind of reverberating. Is that a word?
Reverberate.
And, they're not, they don't exceed the 75, for example, if we're looking at the commercial establishment number for daytime hours, and it's still going to be bothersome. So there will be things that I think that looking at this as a pilot program or an effort to try it and see what kind of effect we have over the season, it's good because it will identify all of those sort of issues that we may not be anticipating just now.
I would just like to make clear what you said about the violations that Sweetgrass Inn had last year at this one event. So the officer was called to the scene because of excessive noise, asked whatever it was to turn down the noise. Did they probably turned down the noise while the officer was there, the officer left, and then they turned it back up? Is that probably what happened? Do you know?
I was not there. I would assume that's how
Okay.
it goes. That's typically the
Okay,
way it
yeah.
happens. But
Okay. So they
That was a big, massive event that they hold every year with a company that just returns every November.
That doesn't give them the,
I understand. I'm
Yeah.
just trying to give context that this was an event that they had contracted out apparently years ago, and maybe they just said, we'll pay the citations, but, we have a
Right.
commitment to
I
make.
just want to make sure that I understand this clearly then. So repeatedly, an officer came, asked them to turn down the noise, and the noise continued to be excessive, whatever that was in the past.
that's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
And more than one citation was for that day.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. So in that sense, the resort has a clear choice of jeopardizing their license or not. It's not accidental. It's not like somebody asked, an officer asked once and the noise was turned down and then everything was fine.
Correct. Yes, ma'am.
All right. I'm good with that. I just want to make sure going forward that we have that as well. So that to get to 5 citations under the new law, new rules, if this is passed, then it's not like we're going to pop up on somebody without them knowing the situation.
Correct.
All right.
And I would suspect that if this ordinance goes into effect, whenever they receive, any commercial property receives a citation, rather than potentially just paying it, they're going to fight it in court. Because if they pay it, they're essentially
Right.
admitting and having one
Right.
strike.
We are going to see court cases. Yeah.
Correct.
But, go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, just a couple comments. I mean, I think it would be helpful to have the measurability. I'm not debating that. A couple issues that I do have with the current proposal. One is I still am not comfortable that there's that, quote, escape hatch clause that was in the original ordinance that said if a resident has an annoying or disturbing noise, that they're going to be able to seek help and get that shut down depending upon what it was, if it's not meeting a decibel level. It's that or, if it's disturbing me, or we have a decibel level, either one of those would result in, found a complaint or give you the ability to correct it. The second thing is the levels themselves. I personally think 75 is a bit high. I'd like to see 70, which is what we had talked about, I think, in one of the prior versions. And I would like to see the entire 85 permitting clauses be basically taken out. I think by us opening up the 85 5-day permits versus even 15 hours, is going to open up, it's going to open up noise opportunities that are not currently in the current ordinance. So I'd like to see that completely taken out, any reference to the 85 or permitting. If somebody wants to have a special event, they can come in. I don't think we should blanket it with the 85. That's going to open up every business opportunity at the 85 level. And to Councilman Hahn's point about the noise issues, we seem to be addressing, and I'll go back to my original comments from a couple weeks ago. I think this noise ordinance is really addressing a dispute between Sweetgrass and the residents around it. And that's how I think this is getting the genesis. I think we've got an opportunity here. I live near downtown and I don't have any noise issues whatsoever. I think everybody's cohabitating quite well down there. And I don't think you're seeing a lot of complaints from the residents down there. Maybe I could be wrong there.
You're accurate.
Okay, so we're creating this, I think, to try to handle what is really a dispute between what's going on at the Sweetgrass with the residents around it. I'd like to give the police the tools, but I'd like us to consider that we put that decibel matrix together, keep it at 70 limit, and omit anything relative to the 85 or permitting.
Chief, there was a lot in that comment. Unpack the piece around the either or. Scott, to your question, because that gives you the decimal, but then it keeps the
If somebody's annoyed
discretion.
in the middle of the night with either some noise or just droning next door at either a neighbor or whatever, they can at least give a call if the neighbor's not responding through other means.
Let Chief answer the question.
That's the complicated part. I totally understand, and even talking about the bass, because that was one of my concerns. A decibel reader may not pick up bass. And so that's something that has to be addressed, because that can be, I live down the street from the clubhouse at my house, and I can feel the bass at my house. So I get it, and that's the one, we kind of talked about that. How do we solve that? It is hard to define what is disruptive to one person versus what's disruptive to another to satisfy that court. I don't know the right answer. I don't know. The subjectiveness, I feel like we've put it back in the same boat we're in. But I totally understand what you're saying, and I don't know the answer, to be 100% honest.
Yeah, and when we looked at similar ordinances, for example, City of Hanahan, Mount Pleasant, Kiowa, it's very similar to the version that we've been working on, and they all include a decibel limit plus the excessive noise prohibited section that's maybe somewhat subjective that would allow us to intervene and address a noise that may not be meeting the decibel, but it is disrupting somebody inside their house. But, again, back to what the chief was saying, it goes back to, okay, so let's say we have a noise. It's not, maybe it's registering at 68. And then we get ongoing calls about it. And, right now, if we eliminate the excessive noise provision, we have nothing to be able to provide some relief to the resident.
Correct. And I think Charleston has an ordinance without any decibels in it. I'm not saying we go that route. I'd like to give you both tools to work with. But it seems workable for them with those kinds of clauses in it, the subjective clauses.
Jan?
The ordinance under Section G, excessive noise prohibited, is a general description of excessive noise. It just says, producing any excessive noise within the municipal limits is what it's called, and then it gives a number of criteria that could be used to define excessive noise without decibel limits. I think the difference here is that if we have a section with decibel limits in it, it's going to be easier to defend in court. To define excessive noise per se is more difficult unless you have a bass drum that the guy is playing excessively in the house next door for hours or something like that that you can point to. So excessive noise could be an item of last resort that you could use. A firecracker going off or something like that that's just instantaneous and then it's gone. But it'd be harder to prove, but I think it's fine being in there, being in the ordinance as it is now.
And Desiree, you looked at other municipalities, to Scott's point, that has kind of the both.
I think the buzzwords are annoying and disturbing in the ordinances. Those are the thresholds for people to be able to make the call.
And I don't know where public safety would be on that, but I'm kind of where Blair is. We just need to try something. And if we leave the either or in and leave out of 70 to 75, I'm certainly not a sound expert. I don't have a dog in that fight. But, so I guess our next step would be to bring something back as a first reading ordinance for city council later this month.
That's correct. And, I would like some direction from the group about what that ordinance for first reading would look like. Do you want to entertain the exact version that came out of the Public Safety Committee, which is what you have in your packets, or do you want to entertain some changes as council members, peers suggested? I think that would be beneficial so that we can present something that would be advertised to the public as what you would be considering at your follow-up meeting.
Yeah.
I think we should.
I would just, in its current form, I'd vote no. And just like, some people may agree with me, but they may not. I don't agree with the decibel levels. I don't understand this kind of fuzzy, well, this is for short-term rentals, but it doesn't apply to anybody else. How about if a full-time resident is exceeding the decibel levels? Are they, exempt or not? Or are we taking out all that short-term rental stuff? I think everybody should be treated the same.
So what's different is what would trigger the revocation process. For short-term rentals, any violation related to a short-term rental, whether it's founded, any founded complaint related to a short-term rental, whether
Okay.
there was a warning or a citation issued,
I
that would
understand.
trigger that. But for business license revocation, that would be
I understand.
violations.
That
So it's a
clears that
higher
up.
threshold.
Yeah, that clears that up, but, yeah, I'm ready to, take it to the next level and let everybody decide how they feel about it.
Yeah, I think to Scott's point, I think we add the either or in there to give us the fallback. And Chief, let's just live with it and see what happens. I mean, again, whether we have it in there or don't have it in there, we're just gonna have to trial run this for a while.
What about pulling out the 85 language?
Say it again, Scott.
What about pulling out the permitting for the 85? I think that opens up a can of worms that's not in the current ordinance, and I think we can handle something on a case-by-case basis. But I think I think it was to the resident that wrote in, that kind of opens up something that we don't have today. I don't think we are going to be able to deal with it necessarily effectively, and it might just give people 10 strikes instead of 5. And I'd like to see that entire language around the 85 and the permitting, the 5 days struck from the
And
ordinance.
have a request process come in.
Something else, but not codify an 85 out and anywhere in this
Yeah.
ordinance.
And would that be a council level, or would that be something else?
So right
If
now,
you
when-
took it out? If you took out the 85?
for special permits, so I'm not sure I understand the
If
question.
we did what Scott said.
Just
take out-
removing that.
Take it all out.
Take out the
Who-
special
who would be
permitting
the
and the
approval?
85, yeah.
I
It
mean,
would
that-
be
that's
city
a
council, yes. It would be the same process as city-sponsored event, that
Yep.
we bring that forward, for you all. And we would keep under Section G exceptions, city-hosted, city-sponsored, or city-sanctioned special events. So if a commercial establishment has a big event coming up, they can come before you all and get an exemption from the code.
Gotcha.
It would essentially, it would be the same as
Put
the
it back where it
permit
was, yeah.
application,
Right.
yeah.
Right.
How does pulling out the 85 affect the Front Beach businesses?
I think we're talking about
Two different
two
things.
different things, so there would still be an exception for GC2. They would be maxed out at 85 during daytime hours only.
Always.
Always, yes. What we would be removing is any other commercial establishment that is not within GC2 would then just have to present a request for a city-sanctioned or city-sponsored event for any special event that would require an exemption to the code.
Got it.
Yeah, Kevin, is that, you good? Yeah.
That's the way it's written now, correct?
No,
No.
ma'am. There's an entire section on the permit for,
Oh.
an application for a permit that would be limited to 5 days a year. So I think that, all of that we would be removing if
Yes.
I'm reading the
I agree
room.
with that. Okay, I agree with that, yeah.
Scott, it would be to just remove subsection D that establishes 85, or it would be to remove the entire process altogether?
The permitting, I think the whole permitting
The
in the
whole
5 days,
process
I
of
get that.
special
Just-
events,
Yeah, I think
okay.
we go back to where we are now, and that is that if somebody has a special event and they want to go do that, they come.
They come.
They come
They
to
come
us.
to us. And
Come to
I
this
think
body.
I think the 5-day pass is
Yeah.
something that I would like to see removed, please.
So we'll remove then section H that talks about permits for additional amplification.
Yeah.
Blair, go ahead.
I mean, I think we're going right back to where we were. It's getting very subjective, and the reason 85 is in there is a maximum because it's objective. Everybody's treated the same, which is what we need to do. And if you take all of this out, we're putting the police chief right back where he was before. He doesn't know what to do.
We're not
If
taking
he
that
doesn't know what
out.
to do, then nothing's going to be.
Yeah, but this is only applicable.
I understand, I understand, but people have parties, people do things, and so they're gonna have to come to us, and every time, we're gonna have to set a noise level. Every time, and then there's gonna be a discussion, every time, well, is it 70, is it 75, is it 80? We don't know what it is. And that's why we're trying to do something that was uniform and treat everybody the same way. Nobody knows, again, what the appropriate decibel level is. And if we drop it too low, it's harder to raise it than it is to keep it a little higher and then tighten it up if necessary. In this meeting tonight, our average is 55. I've been watching it, and it spikes to 65. When people that aren't me are talking. When I talk, it jumps up to 70. So, I mean, it's jumping to 70 when I'm talking. So we don't know what the appropriate noise level is.
So one suggestion for discussion, section H talks about the process. So if there's a request for an exemption, it would have to be provided to the city within 30 days. That's section A. Notice of tentative approval, here's where it spells out what the applicant would need to do to notify adjacent owners about the request being made, the day of the event. Maybe removing section C, limits on hours, maybe that gets to your point that it would be, no?
No, it doesn't.
No.
Okay.
I don't know if Councilman Hahn was misunderstanding. I'm not talking about taking out of the daytime decibel levels by the how we've got it set up in what we're talking about. I'm just talking about this permitting for the 5 days for the 85. We're keeping the front beach where it is, and again, I was asking for 70 versus 75 for the rest of it, but that's something I guess we can talk about later. I think this whole permitting process and allowing for 5 days for the businesses outside of the GC2 is something I couldn't support.
Okay.
Yeah, Desiree, does that make sense?
I
'Cause that's a
understand now,
different-
yes.
Different section. And I think if we go down this path, I mean, Blair, I think to your comment, 85 could be our guidepost that we're going to have when somebody comes in for a request for a special event.
So I guess I'm confused. I think Scott is saying not allow any special events. Take out all of section H. There would still be in there city-sponsored event. Is that what you're referencing, Mayor? That you could still, if somebody wanted to ask for a city-sponsored event, you could do that.
Yes.
But it would not have the guidance that's currently in there about how often,
Correct.
the hours, the decibels. It would just be.
That's going to be in the application for that event, I think.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Douglas?
Yep.
Sorta, kinda, maybe.
Give it a try.
I'd just like to say with what Councilperson Hahn was requesting, there is a sound limit that was part of the permit
That's
application
correct.
that we could pull out that just says, in no event shall a permit be granted which allows the creation of sound registering more than 85 decibels. Let's leave that part in. as part of the ordinance. Just say that,
That's what
Chief had
Scott is
something he wanted to
asking,
say.
Trying
to
to
go,
get-
that entire
if-
subsection H
Take it out.
goes out.
Yeah, if we
so
keep-
let's just
All of
keep
that.
that
I
No.
think
item
if-
D in,
I can't do
everything
that.
except that, I guess is what I'm saying.
I think if you
Dog
keep
section.
that, then
That's it.
it doesn't
You
make
don't go to
sense
6, 7,
unless you have the entire section.
That's reverb.
Chief, what you got?
I was going to say, for any city-sponsored event, council has to approve a resolution. And so all of these topics that we're talking, the times and threshold, that's all going to be something you just put into your
Absolutely.
resolution that you're already going to have to discuss, and it'll all be based on that anyways. So, and that's going to be different for each city-sponsored event. Like Lavella would come in, they might start earlier. So you're already in the business of setting those times when you do those already.
I guess the question to you, Chief, is with that taken out and with the remaining decibel matrix that you have, time of day, districts and types of properties, can you make that workable?
Absolutely, yes, sir, because right now, the city-sponsored event would be something that is exempt from this, and it would typically be something where people want to be able to do this again, and so I would think they'd want to work with us, and we would maybe stipulate that. And I think if you left D in, to go back to the original conversation that Councilman Pierce had, that gives us that avenue for those calls that are abnormal, where there's noise, and it's not something that takes us, that gives us that or that you were talking about with the decibel level.
Okay.
I'd like to make one last comment, if I may. The event, that there was a lot of activity and there was repeated calls going back and forth, I believe I'm familiar with what that event is, and without mentioning anybody's name or any company's name, that event was held every November, and I distinctly remember a couple of years they had it in the county park, which is GC2, right?
No,
It's
no,
the
sir.
GC, what is that?
GC3.
3?
One.
One. But anyway, they had the event there. I'm not saying that that's any of our business or whatever, but I'm saying that in that super event, it might be an option that could be discussed.
That event in the past, since I've been here too, on at least one occasion, had a city-sponsored event, city-sponsored it.
Right.
When it was at Citadel Beach House.
Correct. They have come, for that specific event, they have come to the city for particular permission when
Right.
they've had activities on the beach, which we prohibit and regulate pretty heavily. So that's the reason why they've come before us, but we haven't necessarily approved every single event that they've had within the resort in the past,
Right.
Right. Desiree, do you have a?
which we would need to do. I guess we would do now, starting if this ordinance goes into play.
So do you have enough to go away and come back with an ordinance?
Yeah,
for
we're
May?
adding the section on excessive noise and removing the section H that talks about the permits for, an application for a permit for additional decibel
Days or
limits.
events,
Yes.
yep. I think that's right. Item 2, discussion of requests from property owners on 43rd, 44th, 45th Avenue for properties to be rezoned from the PDD into SR1. Chief, thank you.
Thanks, Chief.
Douglas? I know this
Yes.
has been going for a year now,
Yeah.
give or take.
Well, I think it's officially coming to you now.
Okay, it's been on my desk.
It's
for
been a
year.
month. It's been a month. We haven't been that slow. And as was mentioned earlier, this is specific to 11 properties that are currently in the PDD. Those owners are requesting that they be rezoned to SR1 to basically be similar to the properties in their neighborhood. This set of properties has the unique situation of also being held to restrictive covenants, which has been mentioned already tonight. And those owners are aware, and they are going down what I would call a parallel track with the Wild Dunes Community Association to release them from those covenants. Just, to kind of talk a little bit about timing, there will be a number of steps that that the city would need to take to rezone these properties. There would be a first reading. There would be a planning commission recommendation. There would be a posting of the signs. there would be a public hearing, and then there would be second reading. There would also be at least two ordinances. We believe it would be two ordinances. One would be adopting a new zoning map that would show these properties basically changing in color from green to yellow. The second companion ordinance would be lowering the entitlements under the PDD from their current number by 11, which is the same number that are going physically out of the district. So to keep their development potential the same, the city would need to lower that number by 11. So what we are thinking would be the best plan of action if council is of a mind to do this would be to kind of get your rezoning across, basically very near to the goal line, but not give ratification until those owners come back with some kind of confirmation that they are going to be successful in releasing the properties from the covenants. And we would ask that Wild Dunes not release those covenants, but basically get it to a point where they can be released and they're ready to be released. And then once all of those are aligned and they're ready, then we would want the city to rezone first. So there would be a very short window while these owners would be held to both the city zoning and the Wild Dunes ARC requirements, with the understanding that very shortly after that, the Wild Dunes ARC could relinquish their control. So there would be this kind of transition period that they would be very shortly kind of overlapping with control. So it would be, probably at least a 2-month process for you all to get that, to make this happen. They would have, again, a parallel, and I don't know how long it would take them through the community association process to get that process to the finish line.
So is there anything at our May meeting we would need to kick off to start this process, Douglas?
I would suggest that you go ahead and, if you are of a mindset to do it and you want to do it, that you can go ahead and give first reading to those ordinances.
Scott?
Just a quick question. I mean, should we be obtaining any legal advice about pursuing this based on the other goings-on that we have before we engage in going down any path?
Yeah, y'all have had that conversation, I think.
Yeah, we would ask the legal team that is handling that litigation against the city from the Wild Dunes LLC to provide legal advice on any implications that this change would have in that case, or answer any questions you all may have. They are aware. We have had discussions about it, so they understand what's being requested by the residents, and they are prepared to provide legal advice on that to City Council.
Great, thank you.
Kevin?
So, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have a question. I have no problem with changing the zoning, but and maybe it's a question for Rick, but aren't you deed restricted through the PDD and/or the covenants and restrictions?
Douglas can answer that.
Or Douglas,
Yeah.
aren't they deed restricted, and isn't that deed restriction going to have to be removed?
Yes. Yeah, they are tied to those restrictive covenants through their deeds. And that is the process. Again, it'll be independent of the city, but we would want to have confirmation from the Wild Dunes Community Association that they have successfully, gotten it to a point that they have given up those ARC rights. I just don't know how complex that's going to end up being. Quite frankly, I don't think the Wild Dunes Community Association knows that either yet until they really dig into how to undo those deed restrictions and covenants.
But again, not a city issue.
Not a city issue, but we want to be aware of it, we want to monitor it, and we want to be sure that we don't go over our finish line until they're at a point that they're ready to release those covenants.
And
Jan? Oh, go ahead.
No, I guess to that end, because there's a lot that needs to happen on the Wild Dunes Community Association side and the individual property owners, I would be reluctant to even drafting an ordinance at this point and having first reading until we get more information from them about progress. Drafting an ordinance, having to have that reviewed by our attorneys, it's gonna cost money, and I would rather make sure you're all aware of the petition, have them start the process, and then once we get notification from them that that's been handled and it's being addressed, then at that point, I think we can, trigger first reading for an ordinance.
Yeah.
And
Jan?
and that was kind of, sorry, my point is, I don't mind going down the road, but are we going down a road that's not going to get anywhere if they can't get the deed restriction lifted?
Yeah.
Was my question.
Yeah.
Thank
Jan?
you. Sorry.
I was going to say, we may be putting the cart before the horse right now. I think it would be good for us to give an indication of whether we have a problem with this or not, and I don't think we do. The second one is, I believe we're dealing with the community association in this and not the resort per
Correct.
se.
Well,
So,
the owners are, we're not really, but
Yeah.
yes, the owners are dealing with
Okay.
the community association.
so, I mean,
Well,
let's run it through legal to make sure, but that's
I guess
the
just to
point.
back that up, there would be a companion ordinance that would lower the entitlements within the plan development. So I guess by kind of association, that was the point of
Okay,
potentially dealing with the resort.
And
on
that was Scott's question, to
Right.
make sure we're covered
all
there.
right.
Rusty?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we dealt with this in the Public Services and Facilities Committee meeting, and we came out of it unanimously with a recommendation to bring it to council to discuss. And I'm just kind of repeating what we've already said here. It really is the 11 homeowners that are petitioning the city for rezoning to SR1 and to get out of the PDD. And they also fully know that there is a parallel effort that they're making on their own, through their efforts and expense to get released from the the ARC guidelines, so to speak, and to get that cleared up in the covenants or the deeds. So I think it's a good idea if we still would go ahead and get a legal opinion on this, right?
Yes, sir.
Without drafting an ordinance, but we'd get some sort of legal opinion to Councilmember Pierce's comment, I think, about let's face it, ongoing litigation that we already have, inside the gates, and how that might possibly affect this. And, I mean, it just seems to me that even if we don't draft an ordinance, we can still go ahead and start putting all the pieces in place from a rezoning standpoint, short of drafting an ordinance, so that we can stay ahead of this. And hopefully, those 11 homeowners will know something pretty quickly.
Yes.
Just a little bit of an aside, but as a lawyer, because all of this is dealing with deeds, please make sure you ask our lawyer about the property rights that are tied up with the deed. I would expect 100% of the people would have to agree to this, or it ain't gonna happen. It has nothing to do with us, but all that needs to be in place well before anything comes to us.
Good?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Next item is discussion of proposed initiatives in partnership with Explore Charleston. One is development of a tourism management plan to be titled a community enrichment plan, and two, an island-wide walkability study. You'll recall we touched on these fairly briefly last month. And this would be out of the 30% of ATAX that we had, state ATAX that we have to give to the CVB Explore Charleston folks. We've had conversations, they've agreed to put this in their budget that we'll approve later, to pay it out of the 30% bucket. So Desiree, other background or comments?
Just a comment. We received today the proposed budget for FY24 from Explore Charleston for the expenditure of the 30% for tourism promotion. And these two initiatives are included in their 100% IOP-specific work. This proposed budget will be presented to the ATAX committee next week for their recommendation to council, and then that will come before you all for approval. These were just two initiatives that are different from what we've seen from them before, and one of them stemmed from conversations of council of identifying specific initiatives that would enrich our community, that would benefit the way that we handle tourism currently and changes, potential changes for the future. And Explore Charleston is going through the same process with the city of Charleston currently. The city of Charleston has had a tourism management plan for many, many years. They're updating their recent one. And it seems like a very comprehensive effort that's including many different stakeholders. And there's still a lot of conversation to be had about the process and who would be included and what would be the timeline. And we're going to be presenting that to you all if this is something that the council wants to pursue. And I think we'll have an opportunity to expand on that and have some conversations about successes with other communities when we go through the consideration of their proposed budget. The walkability study, as the mayor mentioned, this was something that the city had identified earlier this year and pursue through maybe a budget proviso. We heard from our lobbyists and their recommendation that a more maybe effective path would be to try to do it in collaboration and partnership with Explore Charleston, using the same bucket of money essentially. And that's what we're doing. So their budget includes $50,000 for that effort and about $30,000 for a tourism management plan.
And Desiree, just for absolute clarity, on the first one, the tourism management plan would include a significant amount of resident business community input. And on neither of these is Explore Charleston driving the bus. I mean, we're leading the project and we'll put our stamp on it for sure. Rusty?
But it's coming out of their 30, it's coming out of the 30%
That's correct.
funds.
It's already in their budget that they will present to ATAX next week.
Correct.
Okay.
The
So
city
ATAX will see this, I mean, they'll see all this first,
Next
along
week.
with
Yes,
the
sir.
budget, okay?
Yes, sir. The ATAX committee, I'm sorry, I just wanted to expand if I could. The way that it's being explained to us that it's worked, for example, for the city of Charleston, is the other local community that has recently done this, is the city works with the consultant and the College of Charleston for research and data on the front end. Explore Charleston is a participant, just like we would anticipate having participants from our local business community, residents. Just for context, we're looking at a process that starts with, a lot of surveying, focus groups, then a committee would be formed by council. We're looking at potentially a committee of about 20 to 30 people so that we make sure that it's I know, we've said the same thing, Jimmy.
This committee, plural.
They've had, this consultant has had very good success doing that. And I think there's ways of making sure that all voices are being heard and we're bringing everybody to the table. But again, I haven't done a tourism management plan, so I think I'm going to be relying on, the consultant and other communities that have done it. But those that have gone through the process believe and sort of indicate that it's a very successful process that yields really tangible results and tangible recommendations for the city to consider in the future.
Scott, then Jan.
Yeah, and I'd just like to make a couple of comments. I'm really just not clear what this effort's objective is at the end. We're talking about tourism management. And, this working with the CVB, I think, is great. I think we've found some good areas to work with them. But I think as we've received even some inbound email already about this, their main thrust is to increase the tourism and to put more people, on our island as far as the increase in tourism, which is a little different than tourism management. So I just hope that we have some more conversation as to exactly what it is, and does the ATAX money, can the ATAX money actually be spent on this kind of a effort in the first place if the 30% is to increase and strictly to promote tourism.
Yeah,
So
I mean, it's
maybe we just
happening
need to have
today
some
in
more conversation about that
Charleston.
before we charge
Yeah.
forward with, this sounds like a fairly significant commitment on not just their part, which I think is admirable, but it's going to be a big commitment on our part, and I really have no idea what the expected outcome is on this.
Yeah. Jan?
Yeah, my question is, well, first of all, could we get a copy of what the tourism management plan looks like for the city of Charleston so we can see what it entails? Okay, I think that would answer a lot of our questions, because I'm not sure exactly where I saw this, but there were several firms that were mentioned that would be part of organizing this kind of study. One of them was College of Charleston, and if it's their office the person that spoke with us before, it was more from the business side of it than it was the community side of tourism. So that was, I think, something that was a little bit not as useful to us, I guess is the best way to put it. And the second one was, there was another firm mentioned that I can't find their name right now, and I looked up their website, and they're sort of personnel related, which was weird. It was more like, are you trying to train people to be more hospitable, to respond, at the hospitality word? So I'm
not
at
sure
a
you have the
loss.
right company. I mean, this is the
Okay.
company that's doing the Charleston Tourism Management Plan today, the
Yeah.
consulting firm.
So I think
So-
I need to see the
Yeah.
copy of the study to see what it's all about. I applaud CVB for looking for ways to share their expertise with us. I just hope it's something that's useful to us.
Much more to come.
Yeah.
Other questions or comments? Next, discussion of ordinance 2023-02 to regulate e-bikes and battery-assisted motorized skateboard on the beach. I think this has gone through public safety, and there is a draft in your packet. Jimmy or Desiree, either one want to? I know this is significant change from what we've seen before, and I think it's a good compromise personally, but
Yeah, this came from the police chief's recommendation, if I may say so. And there was discussion about the hours from 10 to 4 being changed to 10 to 5, I believe.
That is correct, and that was my oversight. We've included the version as it was presented to the committee. The version, if this is something that you all want to take action on at your council meeting, we will make that change and have the hours reflect what the recommendation from the committee was.
I just have a question. How many complaints have you had regarding e-bikes and one-wheels?
I don't know. I would have to rely on the chief if those complaints are
And also,
categorized.
refresh the memory, it's from May 15th to Labor Day, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
All right.
So far this year, we've had one complaint that came in today. That was it this year. Last year, we had more, and it typically picks up, the perfect thing about this ordinance is it picks up around the time that this ordinance is talking about prohibiting it. It's when everybody's on the beach that we start to get the calls about it. We don't get a lot, but we do get several concerned about the safety of the electric assist bikes traveling on the beach when there's people kids running to and from the water and to their parents.
Right. Okay.
And language has been included this was something that the committee had also requested, other motorized vehicles, including skateboards. So this is covered by this ordinance. And again, to reiterate what the chief was saying, it would be, these devices on the beach would be restricted between 10 a.m. and 5 p.m., May 15th through Labor Day,
Is that for the entire beach or just a commercial district?
the entire beach.
Blair.
Yeah, I'm all for this. I was on the beach this past Sunday, and a boy looked like he was about 12, whizzed within 5 feet of me going 25 miles an hour on an electric bike. I mean, it's an accident waiting to happen. I would suggest, Desiree, either I'm reading this wrong or we need to change the language a little bit. Section A, the way it's currently written, it says no vehicles to include blah, 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 are allowed on the beach between 10 a.m. and 5 p.m. That would suggest that vehicles would be allowed on the beach after that, unless it's captured somewhere else. And we don't want to open that door that people think they can drive cars on the beach.
Race cars.
Yeah.
That's a good point, and we'll take a look at it before we present it to you all.
The way it was written before was just no vehicles, and so, and we were dealing
Okay.
with the state definition of what a vehicle was.
Okay.
Kevin, did you have something?
I don't.
Desiree, enough to go forth?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Chief. Item B, environmental discussion of next beach renourishment project and breach inlet dune system. Desiree staff prepared a breakout between the breach inlet and a renourishment project, and it's in your packet.
Yes, so I just wanted to start the conversation. We've had a discussion about next beach preservation efforts that are included in the FY24 budget. But we've started having those conversations with Coastal Science and Engineer, which is our coastal engineering group that has been helping the city and working with the city for many years now on our preservation efforts. The recommendation, so let's talk about Breach Inlet. I think you all have seen and maybe have received comments from folks that live around that area about escarpment that's visible in that section between maybe 3A to about First Avenue. Typically, what we know and what we have seen in previous years is that that area usually restores itself over the summer. However, the recommendation has been made by CSC that the city pursue a general permit for minor beach renourishment, minor dune renourishment. And it's a very simple permitting process. It really it's not going to cost the city anything, if anything. And it would give us the flexibility in the event that conditions worsen and we're dealing with an emergency situation, that we could act as we have done in the past after hurricanes when the dune system has been destructed. We have brought in contractors to restore the dune. What this project would look like would be trucking in sand, bringing in beach compatible sand to restore the dune to certain standards. No work can be done before the turtle nesting season ends, which is November 1st. So we would be working through the summer to obtain this permit that, again, would give the city the ability to act in the event of an emergency, or could also allow individual property owners to restore the dune system within their property line, adjacent to their property line. So we have a couple of options there. Long term, I think we've talked about this before, engaging CSC to identify a sand borrow area offshore closest to Breach Inlet area. We have identified several borrow areas on the northern end of the beach, in association with our beach renourishment projects. We don't have a source identified on the other end. And the closest you can get a source of sand, the cheaper it will be, because you're transporting it from a much closer source. So we would be pursuing that long term. Regarding the beach on the northern, northeastern part of the island, I'm not sure if anybody has looked at the report, the beach monitoring report from 2021. The 2022 one should be coming up shortly, but it talks a lot about the shoal that is attaching. It's expected to attach to the beach within a year and a half to 2 years. Shoal attachment processes are very interesting. They bring in a lot of volume of sand to the beach, but they also create erosional hotspots on either end. So there is a need to manage that source of sand and move it from those areas where it's accreting to those areas that are erosional. The city has done a couple of shoal management projects in the past. That is a recommendation that is being made, that the city plan for that. The good thing is, if we go through and have a shoal management project, it could add time and life to the beach renourishment project that we did in 2018, and it may extend that 10-year cycle for beach renourishment. We don't know yet, but that is the belief, that we can take advantage of that sand source and redistribute it to the island to ensure we have a healthy dry sand beach. We have some money in the budget to pursue this, to pursue a shoal management permit, in addition to a permit for the large offshore dredging project that we anticipate needing at some point. We don't know when. So we're going to be initiating those conversations very, very soon. We've already met a couple times with our coastal engineer. You all may recall, some of you were not on council then when we did the last beach renourishment project, but at the time, we encountered a situation where the area that had been tested and identified as having the most compatible sand for the project happened to be the area where it is believed to include the remains of the second stone fleet. These were some 13 old whaling vessels that had rocks in them, and they were sunk along the harbor to as part of the blockade efforts during the Civil War. So that area has been designated as historic, and that just adds a level of complexity for us to be able to dredge and remove sand from that area. I have a meeting next week with the State Historic Preservation Office to try to understand what their parameters would be, and if there's some sort of agreement for the city to enter into with them that would allow us access to that sand. So it's somewhat complicated. It's very interesting. But I just wanted to kind of give you a high-level overview of what we're doing for beach preservation. There's significant investment included in the budget for this coming year. So there's going to be plenty of conversation as we move forward. But one of the first steps will be engaging CSC on those permitting efforts for both areas.
And Desiree, just for clarity, the only thing the city is committing to at this point is the permitting cost. This is not a conversation at this point about who's paying for renourishment or other work that needs to happen.
That is correct.
Rusty?
Thank you. On the permitting for the shoal management project, is it as simple to get that permit as it is the general permit for the short term on Breach Inlet? Or more complicated?
It is more complicated. We believe it's less complicated than the offshore dredging project.
Okay, all right.
So kind of put them in a scale. Breach Inlet, minor renourishment, simple, maybe not so simple. The shoal management, very difficult for the
And
offshore
CSE is
project.
pretty certain that that shoal is going to attach at some point?
Well,
Oh, it's marching.
it's approaching in some areas already.
Yep.
So we
It's close,
anticipate it, yeah.
Other questions?
Just, we gonna get any more cannonballs?
We may dredge a cannonball
Yeah,
like last time.
Desiree, what else? Anything on
Is
that?
that the rec
No,
department,
sir.
isn't it?
that's
Thank
it.
you for
Yeah.
proactiveness on this one. It's, and you may have said this, permit, offshore work permit is good for 5 years. We'll just have it in hand and be ready to go whenever.
That's
there's
correct.
need.
And having permits on hand also is beneficial for the city in the event of an emergency, a hurricane situation. Have permits on hand. It's easier to get grant funding from the federal and state agencies. So I think even if we don't need it in the short term, having it will be essential and very helpful.
Agree. Thank you all for starting the process. Next, Public Services, discussion of next steps related to hiring a parking vendor for the island for 2024 beach season. Desiree or Douglas, either one.
Well, so I think we talked about it last month, and the discussion that I think you all need to have, I do so say, is what are the next steps? We've met with a parking vendor that presented to the Public Safety Committee a proposal. There are some exceptions in the procurement code that would allow the city to enter into direct negotiations with a particular vendor that has gone through the RFP process in a different municipality within the last 12 months. Or do we want to go ahead and do a full RFP for ourselves? Just for information, I've kind of been doing research on what other communities have done. We know of 3 communities that have done RFPs within the last year or so. Town of Hilton Head, City of Folly Beach, and Surfside Beach. Surfside Beach selected Pivot Parking, who is the vendor that you all heard from. Town of Hilton Head and the City of Folly Beach have recently selected another company, PCI Municipal Services. The amount of vendors that have responded to their RFPs vary between 6 and 8. So there are a number of companies out there that provide these services, and certainly the RFP process would open the city up to understanding what others are offering. It may not be as expedient as it would be if we were to select one winning bid and enter into negotiation. So I think this is a really a policy decision for council. We can go either way. We are just looking direction. Are we preparing an RFP, or are we getting direction to negotiate directly with a vendor?
Jimmy?
Question, is there a way to have a combination of both, meaning we hire this firm for this year and then in the meantime go out for requests for proposals?
I
Or
do
not?
not, I do not get the sense that a company would be willing to enter into a one-year contract. We're looking at probably 3 to 5 year
Vivint
engagement.
5 years, wasn't it?
Yes.
Wasn't that their time frame?
I just think RSP would create a more healthy competition. You know, we're gonna get locked in. I mean, it's three, did you say 3 to 5?
The proposal that we have in place, it was for 5, but other contracts that we have seen vary between 3 to 5.
Scott?
I think I voiced this last time, I would like to see us go to an RFP. In any procurement experience I've ever had, 100% of the time, I've ended up with a better deal, better place, better definition of services, and a better contract terms and conditions with an RFP process or some shopping process. I think the other thing is we're looking at potentially outboarding $7 to $8 million of our general fund revenue over the next 5 years, depending upon how that goes. And we're hoping that any vendor that comes in are going to uplift that revenue and maybe plug some leaks that we have. Currently, with the proposal that was on the table, roughly 30%, that's a contract value of about $2.5 million to the vendor. I think that's sizable enough to go shop, and if we're going to commit to 5 years, we also better be very clear on what our policy is going to be for that, as far as the tickets and parking management. And I think that's going to take some work from council as well. And when I look at the procurement code, I think one of the things that we're trying to use is that 12-month exclusion. But it also states, I think, in our code that when the purchasing agent has good reason to believe that the awarded bidder is the lowest qualified bidder at the time the city obtains such goods and services. And I don't know how we can determine that without actually going out for bid. I think that's a little bit of a do loop in our own policy. And we may want to look at that down the road. But I think the 12-month procurement exclusion for somebody else doing an RFP, I think we'd be remiss for our own budget and cost and policy if we don't do our own RFP.
Jan?
First of all, I think as a government entity, it's always good to send out a RFP and open it up for all qualified applicants. So I heartily suggest that we go to an RFP. Secondly, whoever we hired, even if we hired this person we've already talked to, they're not going to get anything on board before the fall. The beach season is upon us. We can't change our parking procedures midstream. We'd wait till the fall anyway. So we have time to go through this process. It should only take a few months. It shouldn't take longer than that. Thirdly, we know that they will be developing software, and I don't know what other kind of procedures they're going to have. So I know it's going to take, they would want to be here for several years. We need to make sure that they're the kind of company that we want. We haven't even checked their references of the other firms.
We
so-
have. We've
You
talked
did?
We've talked to municipalities that
The
have
other
worked with.
municipality, okay.
Yeah,
I
with
didn't know that.
multiple
Good.
vendors.
I mean, they seemed qualified from what they told us, but I certainly would support sending this out to an RFP as a government entity.
I think the smart thing to do is go out for RFP. Got 6 to 8 interested vendors, possibly. Do it.
All right. Good. I will include this for an action item at the council meeting to pursue an RFP on parking management services.
Thank you. Item 2, discussion of implementing adopt a drain program. Douglas?
Yes, the city of Isle of Palms began working with the City of Charleston's Office of Resilience and Sustainability with this pilot program that we're doing for food composting. We became aware of another program that they're doing, and you heard mentioned from Davis and Floyd about this community engagement on maintaining drainage features. So the city has already adopted a drain program where owners property owners can adopt portions of the drainage system adjacent to them, and we would encourage them to clean them, to monitor them, to report problems, kind of whatever they're comfortable doing in regards to that system. Gives the public works staff and the city kind of boots on the ground. You know, a lot of this stuff is happening at times when the staff is not here to see exactly what's going on, so they can document it, report it. So we've reached an agreement with them, and they are happy to participate with us. We've been providing data on all of the components of our drainage system. They're incorporated into a map, and we're basically at a point where we're ready to launch this program. We expect and we would like to be able to launch it at the Hurricane Expo next week. So we're getting all of our ducks in a row to do that, and excited, and you can start adopting drains near you very shortly. Talk to Matt.
Jimmy's already got his marked out. Yeah, he's good to go.
I like the ducks in a row.
Ducks in a row, yeah.
Can we add adopt a ditch too? Because I think we have more ditches than
You know,
drains in our
it's interesting.
community.
So there were a lot of caveats to our joining this program. They would not allow us to include DOT infrastructure, and they would not allow us to include open ditch structure. So it's really city-maintained grates, and I think their program had.
They know what they're doing.
Yeah, they had concern over, but we've asked, I mean, I think so much of our system is in the DOT right-of-way. I can't believe that it would be any more liability, or the DOT would have a problem if somebody cleaned it, but they specifically told us that we couldn't do that.
Okay,
But
thanks.
we'll keep asking the question.
All right, Rusty.
How will we know the difference between an SCDOT drain and the ones that we
So the way it will
adopt?
work is you will, there's gonna be, there's a website, we're gonna have a QR code, you hit that QR code, it then takes you to a map, and any that are available for adoption have a little emblem on them, and you'll hit it and say, I'd like to adopt this one. There's gonna be a lot of components of the drainage system that aren't on that map, and that's intentional because they're either SCDOTs or they're an open drainage ditch, which we're not including. And so the map is kind of the gatekeeper of what's available and not available.
Okay. I asked this question in the committee and didn't get an answer, but can we get a plaque or something if we adopt a drain?
We'll get you a plaque. Sure. Rusty, we'll get. We are a little bit beholden to them.
Okay, I know.
All right, moving on. Next item is Dominion Energy projects, underground and utility projects on the island. You recall we have $75,000 or $80,000 in the budget for the next project. We've completed the one at 21st and Palm. In your packet are the other projects that Dominion developed for us, gosh, Desiree, 3 years ago, maybe?
2020, yeah.
Yep. So I know this has been presented to committee, and Desiree, what else from your viewpoint?
Just wanted to bring life again to this list so you all could see what other projects have been looked at as feasible projects that we could pursue. We have met with the Dominion Energy team, and the recommendation was for us to pursue the project number 4, which is 14th Avenue, converting the overhead essentially between the intersection at Palm all the way down to Ocean Boulevard. There's some significant, poles and lines there, and you have to see that as the entrance to the island. So I think it would be aesthetically, it would be an improvement, an aesthetic improvement to the entrance to the island. We've also met with them, and they're working on the design for the City Marina project, undergrounding that section between Waterway to the end of the marina and along the property line between the marina and Dewey's. That project may be a little bit larger than what we anticipated, so once they complete the design, we'll get an updated cost estimate that would help us decide at what point to pursue that project. Ideally, we would like, the reason why we started having this conversation with Dominion Energy is that we would like for this to be done concurrently with the 41st Avenue drainage project. Whether that's feasible or not, we don't know yet. Folks at Dominion Energy seem to think that it could be done. But, you know, we anticipated the project of 21st to be completed last October, and just reminding you all, it got completed in February.
So committee is recommending 14th Avenue, which when you're coming over the connectors, pretty good eyesore.
That's right.
For sure.
And we'll continue to work on the marina. You know, that project has a higher price tag of about $250,000 as, you know, at the top of that range. So once we have more information from the design team, we can bring that forward and decide timing for that one.
Perfect. Questions? Next item, personnel, discussion of partnership with law enforcement neighborhood support to establish a paid internship in the police department. Chief Desiree?
So this was and the chief can certainly chime in. The city has an internship program. We've had interns in the police department and the fire department in the past. The offer that has been made by the Lens organization, the law enforcement neighborhood support nonprofit on the island, is to make a donation to the city that would allow us to pay a stipend to the intern. The process would be the same as we've done in the past. The police department receives the applications, they review it, they select the applicant, they assign them, you know, duties as appropriate. The only difference would be that we have a donation that would allow us to pay a stipend. And we brought this forward to the committee, and I think the committee wanted to have this discussion with all of council before we accept and pursue having this partnership with the Lens organization.
You want to do it?
Jimmy.
Go ahead.
Blair.
I thought what the committee wanted to do was first make sure that the Lens program was complying with all of the appropriate guidelines on how you spend ATAX money. And to that end, we requested a federal form, Jimmy did, I don't know what the name of the form is, that would give us that information. And so we've tabled this until such time as they provide this information to us.
So the ATAX committee is meeting next week, and on their agenda, there's an item to provide an update on the expenditure of grant money received for all organizations. And the Lens program was asked to participate and provide an update on the expenditure of that $10,000 grant.
But we asking for more than that. We were asking for the federal, whatever that federal
$990.
form.
I don't know if the city, we can request documentation related to the grant that was given by the city. I'm not sure if we have any, we can request it.
Yeah,
I
I mean,
don't,
the concern is that they're playing games with ledgers, and they're saying, well, we're gonna spend the money in this ledger the right way, but we're not necessarily gonna spend the money the right way in another ledger. And money's money. And so what the committee wanted to see was all of their expenditures, because they have made expenditures that were clearly outside of what would be appropriate for ATAX, or even, you know, depending on your definition of the Lens program. And so we wanted to see all of that, and that was what Jimmy asked for.
so this nonprofit, just like any nonprofit that receives grant funding, they are required to spend the money received from the city from ATAX in ATAX tourism-related eligible expenditures, and those are spelled out in the code. What they do with their money received from private donations, they don't necessarily have to comply with that tourism-related expenditure definition. They would have to comply with whatever bylaws they put in place when seeking private donations and private funds. But I guess I just want to make that distinction that they need to answer to the city related to the $10,000 grant. And we can get legal advice. That's just my understanding.
Which is what's happening on the 16th.
That's
you
right.
said.
But they're being asked to provide information about how they spent the ATAX grant received.
Which is
So you think you're going to get that information? Because I know that ATAX Advisory Committee, a member had asked for that, and he was having trouble in the past.
Well, they've been invited and requested to attend, as did the chamber and the VFW. Everybody
Yeah,
who's received money.
You know, I'd be happy with a full accounting not just a summation of what they spent, but a full accounting of what they did with the tax funds before we proceed.
We can
I mean,
certainly,
and that's exactly what we're asking to be presented to the
Right.
ATAX committee.
That's it.
correct, next week.
Kevin, Rusty.
Yeah, thank you. Well, all of that aside, of all those requests, it looks like a great program to me. Paid internship program that's funded by law enforcement neighborhood support. If we get all that other cleared up, just on the surface of it, I'm in favor.
Next item, other items for discussion. Discussion of 2023 surfing lessons application from Bryson Marshall DePass, IOP surf lessons. And this is for 26th Avenue, I believe. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And I think Desiree would talk next year of getting all these applications at one time so we can kind of see how things ferret out across the island and kind of have one-time approval, if you will.
Yes, it's a little bit of a hassle to track these down every time we get one. So my plan for next year would be to have a deadline end of February. Everybody who wants to get a permit submitted at the same time, and you all can consider them all at once. But this would be the 5th permit, and would be for 26th Avenue.
So this will be an action item for council meeting.
Yes, sir.
And I'm sorry, how many are we gonna, for the year, it's gonna be 5, or are we doing, it was, what, 3 last year? All right.
It was 3 last year. There's no limit. It's up to you all to decide whether you want to approve it or not.
And I think, Scott, to that question, I think if we can next year have a deadline, get them all at one time,
Yeah.
let us have the approval or denial process all at one
Yeah,
time.
'cause they're all spread out, it seems
Yeah.
like.
Yeah, and that's what I've been doing based on the, the feedback from the first 2 applications, and wanted to make sure that we're not concentrating them all in the same place. Every time I get an application, we go back and say, okay, can you just revise your location to make sure that we're spreading them out around the island?
Okay,
But it would be much easier to manage if we have them all at once.
And they don't get in the way of swimmers,
There are,
the surfers.
there are code regulations that regulate how close a surfing can
Yeah,
happen.
that's in there today. That's not new
Correct, yeah,
information.
that's not new.
Okay.
It's 100 feet from swimmers. They have to be within 100, no more than 100 feet from swimmers.
Does the swimmer move or the surfer move?
Surfer.
The surfer.
Surfing's prohibited closer than 100 feet.
Okay.
All right, next item, discussion of requests from Outer Banks Season 4 production to film on the beach during one weekday in July. And Desiree, I know you've had conversations with these folks.
Yes, I met with their location manager. They are requesting, and they're going to come, I believe, to your next council meeting to get a full approval. It would require city-sponsored event status, consideration from the city. They're requesting the ability to film on the Sea Cabins Pier, which will require permission from Sea Cabins. We don't own that pier; that's privately owned by the Sea Cabins. And it's just one scene on the pier. They're requesting and would be needing some crowd control. They would be hiring off-duty officers for that. It would be done during the day, either Tuesday or Wednesday, which is, roughly not as popular as on a weekday. But it needs to be in July, according to their production schedule. I've discussed this with both police chief and fire chief. We don't anticipate any issues. They came last year, and they were great to work with, so we don't anticipate, again, any major issues. They're not requesting any road closures or any other additional, they don't have any other additional needs from the city other than the permission to film on the beach, on the pier.
Again, they'll come and be an action item for our May meeting. Next item, financial review, financial statements and project worksheets. Debbie?
All righty. So, we're 10 months into the city's fiscal year. 83% would be the year-to-date target. General fund revenues are at 84%, and general fund expenditures are at 84%. Total revenues are at 81%. Total expenditures are at 70%. Looking at the general fund year, so the biggest driver on the under budget condition total funds is the capital projects fund. You can see there that the forecast has us almost, well, 2.7 million under budget. And that's made up of the FEMA house that's in the budget and the drainage phase 3, and then about $200,000 in just general drainage contingency that we don't think will get spent by the end of the fiscal year. General fund revenues, property taxes, local option sales taxes are trending ahead of budget and a prior year. Business licenses, rental licenses, building permits are in okay shape related to the budget, but you can see that they are behind where we were this time last year. So we're taking that into account in the forecast number. Still think we'll beat budget, but probably not by as much as I would have thought a couple of months ago. It speaks to, Douglas mentioned that the pace of new construction is trending down. So that drives a lot of, obviously, building permits and license revenue. On the general fund expenditure side, we're right at 84% of budget, but by the end of the year, I predict that we'll be about $820,000 over budget. 500 plus of that relates to the one-time out-of-budget employee compensation adjustments that we did, that council approved. There's also some significantly over-budget legal expenses in the general fund, and insurance costs are higher than budget. Both the workers' comp and the property and liability experience modifiers are up. So that's driving some increased insurance costs over what we thought in the budget.
Debbie, do you have any thoughts about the projected positive balance?
Yeah, I think we'll be about net. You can see we're forecasting beating the budget on the revenue side in the general fund by
Yeah.
$1,829,000. But we'll be over budget on the expenditure side by $820,000, so that is right at $1 million.
Million, yeah. Thank you.
We'll refine that as we go. We'll know more
Yeah.
when the business license renewal and the rental license renewal kind of fleshes out next month, by the end of next month. Next page, briefly touch on cash, not a big change. We've got very healthy cash balances. You can see that we have the LGIP interest rates, 4.64%, $35 million there. Deposits at Truist, $2.3 million. This is a place where I recognize the loss of Laura, because she was really good about keeping track of what our daily cash balances were at Truist locally. And she would kind of remind me, our target was about $1 million. So we would move cash to the LGIP when we thought we had too much. So we'll do better next month about keeping that balance down. It's down now from what it was at the end of the month. Restricted cash, $16 million. I think I've covered most of the notes there. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, next page. We got another monthly payment on municipal accommodations tax, same amount for beach preservation fee, and the trend of increases over the prior year continue. I believe that there's probably some catch-up going on in that $86,000 compared to the $40,000 from the prior year. I think the county has implemented a new system for their accommodations tax payments, and they're having some growing pains, I believe. But I think they've probably caught up now. February's a low month, so it gives them some breathing room. Next page, we did receive a new quarterly payment from state A-tax. It was slightly ahead of same quarter last year. Again, this would be the lowest quarter of the fiscal year related to A-tax payments. A 9% increase over FY '22. No new activity on Charleston County pass-through payments. So next page, we'll look at hospitality tax, which were really good for April. So that would be the March, food and bev sold in March. 23% ahead of last year.
It's only gonna go up. I mean, you look at March this year, last year, then look at March of 2020. We went 12,000 to 107.
Well, that was COVID time.
That was COVID, but still. We had the two biggest months are coming up. Right?
Lots of eating and drinking going on.
Eating and drinking, yep.
Okay, next page I think is beach preservation fee, so we can skip that one because we've already talked about it. And then there's local option sales tax. There we go. It's about 10%. So we've seen 9%, 11%, 10%. Across the A-tax, hospitality tax, well, hospitality tax is more, local option sales tax. Lots of good economic activity happening. Project worksheets, next page, please. Drainage Phase 3, we had a pay app number 8, Forest Trail and 30th Avenue. Left on the contract is $1,115,000, but that would include 41st, no?
36.
36. If there are no questions, we'll go to the next one. And this is, we received the final application for payment on the improvements to the bulkhead along the intercoastal waterway. So we're kind of done for the time being on this schedule. We'll retire it for a while until construction starts on the public dock. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Debbie. Good report.
Yep, good.
Yeah. Nothing for procurement. Desiree, capital projects update?
Okay, so for the first slide you see there are updates related to drainage. Phase 3, drainage, the drainage outfall improvement at 30th, essentially completed with the exception of some check valves and some minor improvements there. We're still waiting for the check valves to arrive. That's anticipated in the next few weeks. Installing them won't require any traffic detours or any closures, so that should happen pretty seamlessly. 36th Avenue, y'all recall we were talking about the need to potentially having to move this off season. We're at the point where we have to make that call. There's still some coordination happening between the manufacturer of the massive pipe that's going to go underground and and Thomas and Hutton. And our goal would be to continue the work to ensure that we can start and have some work on the ground happening mid-August. So our target is after school starts, usually beach traffic starts dwindling down, and we want to start that project up again as soon as possible. So that is the plan. So the road closure in that intersection would take place at that time. 41st Avenue, we continue to work with Thomas and Hutton and the South Carolina Office of Resilience, who's funding this project. There's a lot of work going on, still waiting for a permit from DOT for the work that's happening at the intersection of 41st and Waterway. Terracon is coordinating the purchase of the mitigation credits that's related to the area, the critical area that will be disturbed as part of this project. All that is being paid by the grant funding agency. Thomas & Hutton is working on technical specifications and getting ready for the bidding process so that we can go, as soon as the funds are released from SCORE, we can finish the environmental assessment process, the mitigation credits can be bought, then we can go out for bid and get a contractor for the actual construction. Still being told by the engineers that construction is feasible to start by the end of this year. This is a project that we're monitoring very closely because we want to make sure that it happens in the off-season and we minimize any disruption to the marina operations. Comprehensive Drainage Master Plan, I won't go into that. We heard from them earlier during this meeting. Work related to the Isle of Palms Marina and Breach Inlet. Amy, if you don't mind going to the second slide. The boardwalk project is complete. Lighting was the final piece, and that was installed last week. I have not seen it at night yet, but I hope you all have. But it looks really, really great. Related to the actual public dock project, the public notice has ended for both OCRM and the Army Corps. And right now, ATM is coordinating with them to answer any questions or comments that were received as part of the public notice period. We have an RFP out for an engineering firm to help us with the design and permitting process for the marina dredging project. That deadline is later this month, and we're hoping that we can get that project started by the beginning of the fiscal year. The RFP, if you look at it, it's on the website, but it includes some tasks related to coordination with adjacent neighbors. So I want to make sure that we, if there are other folks or the other organizations that have dredging needs, we want to make sure that we partner with them to try to facilitate and streamline the permitting process and potentially the contracting piece. So we'll be asking the engineering firm to initiate those efforts as well. Breach Inlet boat ramp. So we were lucky enough to be able to partner with Coastal Dredging. That's a company that was hired by the Boathouse Marina to do some dredging, and they're redoing the entire their docks. So while we were there, we asked them to do some minor maintenance to clear up the boat ramp and the sediment that was prohibiting or preventing boats from launching during low tide. So they did that work for us. It was less than $10,000, so I was able to approve that, and we were able to get that work done pretty quickly. So now at low tide, there's about 5 feet of water that should allow pretty easy launching. We also asked ATM to review some concerns that we had regarding the slope of the existing ramp. They haven't been able to produce anything for us just yet, but this is something that we budgeted in FY24, so we're right on time to be able to do something if it's necessary. And then the final one, I'm just gonna consult. Oh, maybe that's it. That's it.
Very good.
Oh, so many projects that are completed, I'm telling you.
Not a bad thing.
Yeah.
That's all I have.
Thank you, Desiree. The only thing I'd give you on the legislative report, a lot of conversations with other mayors and our lobbyists today. The short-term rental bill is back in the House version of the budget as of 1:30 a.m. last night. So
It's back on?
it's back on.
A budget
So it's
proviso.
budget proviso. It's going now to the Senate and the conference committee that our lobbyists are confident it'll get pulled back out, but believe it when we see it, I guess. So this was a last-minute end around that I don't think many people in the House were happy with, but is what it is. No miscellaneous? There being no further business?
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Off record at 7:43. Thank you all.